you have a comment?
President Sandy, I'd ask that we suspend the agenda, current agenda, and move items 2.6 and
2.5
2.5 forward.
to the end of the agenda.
Correct.
Correct. There's a motion. Is there a second to move items 2.5 and 2.6 to the end of the agenda? So moved. Second by Kwame. Any other comments? We're simply suspending the agenda to move items 2.5 and 2.6 to the end of the agenda. Mr. Weber, questions?
I'm not understanding. You want to move those to the end of the agenda? You
That
want
is
to deal
correct.
with everything else first,
Yes, sir.
point by point?
Well,
To
that
make everyone
depends
sit
on,
here
that
through all
depends
of that?
on if somebody's going to move to do a consent agenda
Okay, so-
on all the other items.
Yeah, if you could help me understand the intention of this motion then, because it seems like the things that the most people are interested in discussing, you're wanting to move those to the end of the agenda. What's the purpose?
That is correct. Mr. Weigel, would you like to?
Mr. Weber, my plan is everybody's here and in interest of time, I believe they're probably wanting to speak about the two items moving towards the end. My plan was to move forward with a consent agenda on the other items unless somebody else would like another item pulled along with those two.
For discussion, certainly. So if we move to suspend the agenda and move these to the end, then I will open up and entertain a motion on yes, Mr. Weber?
What if we move those to the beginning of the agenda? Would that accomplish what you want?
No,
Because?
because if there are other, we're going to force everyone else that's here wanting to talk about one of the other items to wait 3 hours for them. So my thought process is we deal with those items first. I would guess that unless there's something specific that anyone else wants pulled out of the other items, we would be able to deal with them relatively quickly. And within 10 minutes, we could get on to the other items on the agenda. And certainly, I think Mr. Weigel, based upon his comments, would be willing to entertain if there's another specific item you want brought forward, we can do that as well.
Myself or anyone else?
Or anyone else, certainly.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Bean.
I certainly understand what you're trying to accomplish here, but the agenda is advertised publicly in this order. People may come to the meetings based on the order that they are in the agenda. And to move them and change them, to me, may make it impossible for people to be here for the agenda items that they had planned.
Certainly. Well, there is a motion and a second by Kavani to suspend the agenda and move item 2.5 and 2.6 to the end. Any other comments? Mr. Lee? Yes, sir.
Although I don't like this, I think the only other item I'd like to make sure we discuss is 216.
Certainly, I think if there's a motion on the consent agenda, we can certainly make sure to pull that item as well. So, there's a motion and a second on the floor to suspend the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
No.
Motion carries. Mr. Veen dissents. Mr. Weigel, do you have a second motion?
I do, I'd move that we have a consent agenda but pull items 2.5, 2.6, and 2.16.
Great. Any other items to be pulled from the consent agenda?
Yes, if I may, President Sandy, this is an unusual action. I don't recall ever doing this before. So I'm going to just ask of the room, item 2.1, the CDBG Annual Action Plan. Ms. Richards, are there people here prepared to speak on this tonight? Do you see any, is there any pressing issue? Very good. All right. And
Council President,
please.
just for Mr. I'm not aware that any of the other items, anyone's here to speak on them directly. Some are support, anyone who's here this evening are in support of the agenda item that with the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan, and certainly if anyone is interested in speaking on any of these other items, they're welcome next week at the City Council when there is also a public hearing on all of them.
Very good. Just one more time, and then I'll drop it. This is such an unusual action on our part. I don't know that we've ever done this before, not in my memory. And we've known about this agenda since Friday, so it's a little disconcerting to have it happen in this way, but I'm ready to move forward. Thanks.
I'm aware of multiple times where we've suspended the agenda for items. I don't think in my recollection we've done a consent agenda at the committee of the whole. But again, in the sense of trying to be good to all the people that came here to speak on these other issues, I thought it would be.
The consent agenda is a new, that's
Yes,
what I'm referring
yes,
to, but I'm ready to move forward.
Okay.
Thanks.
So there's a motion. Is there a second on the consent agenda excluding items 25, 26, and 216? Thank you, Mr. Kavami. So that means we would move items 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, 210, 211, 212, 213, 214, 215, 217, 218, and 219 with a motion to discuss at the City Council meeting next week. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So we moved item 2.5 and 2.6 to the end, so we will start with item 216. It's the engineering amendment for project 8338 42nd Street Underpass environmental document.
I think Mr. Grassroll.
Yes, Mr. Grasser, certainly. Good evening, Mr. Grasser.
Good evening, Council President Sandy, members of City Council. Item 216 is the amendment as noted for the 42nd Street underpass. If you remember, this thing's got quite a history as noted in the staff report. 7 or 8 years ago, we actually created an environmental document. We weren't able to get it filed because of some technical reasons. And we had two alternatives there. We had a sunken underpass and then one that had a jug handle. If you remember right, what really brought this thing back was the fact that the golf course changed from a golf course into private property, which made some alternatives available that we really didn't spend much time looking at the first go around when it was designated 4F. If you remember, that designation on the federal side essentially means you need to eliminate most other reasonable alternatives before you can consider that property. So we hired an engineer to go look at it under that scenario, and while they were looking at it, then it reverted back to a golf course. Well, rather than pulling that work activity, we actually asked them to investigate with Federal Highway and the state DOT. It's like, well, how much work effort would it be to take a look at this under the 4F scenario? And they came up with a shortened version of the 4F to potentially move it forward. They did various environmental, historical analysis, things like that. So they did kind of I'll call it a shorthand version of the entire environmental process. But in doing so, we had to bring in some other alternatives. You'll see in your staff report, there's I think 5 different alternatives that we're still kind of working through. I don't want to go through those tonight. The intent is just kind of give you a pictorial. Some of those are more impactful to the golf course. Some are going to be more impactful to the gas station. Those are really the two things that kind of come into play. And if you shift things, you're going to, move it from one to the other. Our goal is to continue to work with the property owners on both sides and bring in, I'm hoping, going to be 2 alternatives to the City Council at some point in time. We'll get some of those eliminated. We'll find out the desires of the property owner, relative to, how impacted they may be. For instance, like the gas station is highly impacted. It's a intersection of concern even without this project, just because of the proximity to the interstate ramps 42nd Street and traffic coming in and, in and out of that. Particularly it's the left turnouts are always some of the more problematic. So we'll explore the option of doing a 3/4 intersection, which could allow most of those turns except for that left turn out. But again, given where they're at, that's probably an important turn, for people coming out, fueling up and heading to the interstate. So without belaboring that anymore, we want to explore that. We've also had more detailed discussions with Burlington Northern, and the engineer here is doing some almost preliminary alignments and stuff with Burlington Northern. Since the last time we've done this, they've come up with some additional requirements that they want us to look at. They've actually increased the rail speed in there to help decrease the amount of closure and stuff. So when they're doing a shoe fly, they want to consider those. So anyway, there's a host of different things that have come into play over time, and I can't call it a shorthand version anymore because I talked too much already. But we'd like to continue this with, we're estimating another $200,000 additional cost to get us to the environmental, and again, the goal to bring 2 alternatives to the city council. The latest update in here, and it depends on choices and decisions that are made, we're in the $48 to $55 million range probably for the underpass.
Any comments or questions from Mr. Grasser? Mr. Bean?
Thank you, President. It looks like the 4F, that designation you're saying has some wiggle room in it now that it never used to have. That's a federal designation 4F, right?
Correct.
And the state has the ability to adjust the meaning, or can you explain that a minute?
I think it's a matter of interpreting, in a shorthand version, it's a matter, you're either going to highly impact a business, maybe even buy them out and close them down, versus the impact to a golf course. And so when you're dealing with those two highly type of impactful scenarios, we've learned that is high impact enough for the 4F to be considered, as an alternative. The 4F, if they wouldn't want you to go to a 4F if it's just a matter of convenience or saving a couple of dollars or something like that. That would be a different scenario. But what we've identified essentially through the process is it's a pretty highly impactful decision. So they're willing to look at that. That moves it into that realm of there's not really many other alternatives.
Are these the only ones that they want to consider versus anything else that might be conceivable? One of the issues that I have is we're dropping that intersection about 25 feet or so below the railroad tracks. When you drop that intersection that much, and you can see what happens when you have snow and other hazards that can happen, I'm somewhat concerned that the solution is worse than the problem that we're trying to solve. I know the biggest issue is time and savings with train crossing. I mean, that's really why we need a separated crossing. But the alignments are all not very well aligned. I mean, it's going to be so different from what it is now, and there are some other issues. I was hoping there would be some other alternatives looked at besides these that could be more of a win-win.
I don't think so. You can't do an overpass. The overpass touchdown points take you all the way to halfway to University Avenue. So we've gone through all those in the last environmental review. Mm-hmm. It gets to be a criteria to go over a railroad track. You have to be that much higher above the grade. Going below where you're using vehicle standards, you don't have to go as deep. And yeah, we've talked about that extensively. The sunken intersection would be more of a concern on snow and things like that. Some of the jug handle moves, you could open that land up a little bit more and not be quite as tunnel-like. So,
I mean, in this case, you couldn't have shifted the intersection further to the south and tried to lessen that amount?
I can't tell you the reason we looked at that, and it ends up being more impactful, I believe, to both the golf course and the gas station if you move that intersection too far south. That's my shorthand version.
Thank you, Mr. Veen. Mr. Veen, did you have some other design thought in mind? You know, I know we've been looking at this for a long time, but maybe you actually have a different thought.
Well, the only other one that I had considered, and I think it's a long shot, is if there were some ways to partially cover it.
To cover it,
So
right.
it wouldn't fill in like a normal, open. But I don't know how that works geometrically, but if there were an alternative where they could have looked at something that would have at least minimized that from being a potential hazard.
Mr. Grasser, could you bring that up to the engineers?
We could talk to our consultants about that. I think that introduces other issues into the process, but it's something we can certainly look at.
Great. Ms. Ma?
And you said you were going to bring these alternatives back so we could review one more
Correct.
time? Once this was on there, I kind of realized that, you know, I thought we maybe had more of a set alternative. Is this, we're still in the exploratory phase for which alternative we feel is best for the city?
Well,
Or is this
I
just to
think that
satisfy the
the-
requirements?
remember, we went through, the last time, we went through the extensive palette of alternatives. We ran like 20 alternatives.
Yeah.
The thing that you have to be aware of to get into the 4F and to get to where we're at takes an extensive amount of traffic analysis. They're getting into they're almost like a preliminary design stage in this. And so the more alternatives you carry, you're carrying this kind of extreme amount of analysis on all of those. And our original goal was to really only analyze 2, but you know, there were a couple more came to light, and we said we really just need to explore these a little more. But at this point, the scope wasn't to go back and open up the universe of alternatives. It was supposed to be just a simple update of 2 alternatives. And got a little more than that.
Okay. But we're going to see it back so we can
Yes.
keep this one kind of driving forward?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Weigel, comments?
I would just say I'm glad to see this is continuing to move forward and options are continuing to be presented, and I'd make a motion to approve this.
There's a motion to extend the consulting agreement. Is there a second? Second by Mock. Further discussion? Mr. Weber?
The purpose of the motion, then, we already have a firm that we're working with. This is to expand their contract for another environmental impact statement, or is this the first impact EIS that'll be done on this?
This is not an environmental impact statement, it's an environmental analysis. And we've talked with the state and you know, they've basically been able to determine we can downsize the level of the environmental analysis. But the original scope was to do the environmental on 2 alternatives. Like in the meantime, as staff and the consultants have worked together, we've had to look at more. So we've expended more of those funds looking at these different options. But again, our intent would be to try to get them back to 2 when we bring them back here. But we want to make sure they're the right 2, and some of that's going to involve knowledgeable discussions with the property owners.
And it's important to move this work forward during the interim session so that we can be looking for funding for the legislature in the coming session. We want this to be as thoroughly studied and as prepared as possible for that next session.
Yep. And we do have this on the list on our state request as a regional funded project. So we want to get this thing wrapped up so we can bring some of the politics into the process to get funding.
And that makes a great deal of sense to me. In addition, or it's separate, they're not parallel cases, but this is a good time to be trying to take care of some of our long-term infrastructure needs, including a 4th bridge. When would we anticipate that discussion will be coming back before council?
The MPO is working on you're talking the analysis of the intercity bridge or the Merrifield Bridge?
The intercity bridge. It's my understanding that there's basically two options waiting for an environmental analysis. Mr. Phelan, yeah. President Sandy, I didn't mean to.
Council President Sandy and Councilmember Weber, I had a conversation, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Council President Sandy, is that, as you probably read last week, East Grand Forks would really like to move forward with that neighborhood bridge sooner rather than later. Since it's really more, not that it doesn't have some benefits for us, but much more on the east side. So what I agreed with, East Grand Forks has asked this question on behalf of their city administration, so I talked to their city administrator, is how do we take whatever that ad hoc group completed with the intercity bridge, or neighborhood bridge, how do we now move that forward? So I think their question to our council president and you is, should we have a joint meeting as two city councils? Should we just separately look, see what the outcome of whatever those studies were? And then more importantly, where do we go from here? And once we decide where do we go from here, who's going to pay what? And they would like to have that conversation with you as city council sooner rather than later. And so I would anticipate, long story longer, in March, we would bring that back, and I'll work with Council President Sandy about whether that looks like a joint meeting or if we do separate meetings. But they do want to move and have that conversation with you sooner rather than later.
Very good. I don't mean to cloud the issue tonight. This is important, especially to that neighborhood, people who travel through that area. The intercity bridge, it has tremendous impact on my neighborhood, the ward that I'm currently representing. And so I'm hoping support this moving forward. Also need to be seeing that other move forward also.
Yep. I think we want to support, Al talked about this underpass. We're already working with the DOT on the interstate interchange between 47th and 49th. That's moving along. And then the intercity or neighborhood bridge, I think will come back to you in March, and we'll have to determine what the next actions are. Probably a lot like Al's talking, some sort of environmental review will be needed, and then who pays for
You
what.
presented those in kind of a curious order. Is that the order that we would anticipate hearing about them?
Well, just because the first two projects are more in our funding queue, the bridge is not right now. We have to, I think we need to have city council pick a location and then then start what these projects are already. The underpass is already within an environmental assessment review. The interchange is already at an environmental assessment review with the DOT. So when it comes back to you, I think the decision you're going to have is to pick a location, and number two, to agree to move forward with an environmental assessment. And that may or may not include North Dakota DOT funds, because you may not, East Grand Forks may not want to wait for Minnesota and North Dakota to come up with funds to help cost share on those studies. Those will all be about that intercity or neighborhood bridge discussion that will come. And then the fourth conversation is probably with the county about, are they willing to move forward with the Merrifield Bridge and support that, whether it's Polk County and Grand Forks County.
And I apologize, I don't mean to be argumentative, but those three were presented as though they were kind of in a prioritized list. Have we made that official? Are those our top three priorities in that order?
Council President San, Councilmember Webb, we have made it, but we said not that one's better than the other, but we said that because some are further along than others. And knowing that we had this 5-year transportation infrastructure plan, where the DOT directors even said, maybe one of our challenges will be having enough projects to spend all the money that is going to come. We
have projects for them, don't we?
We have projects,
Yes,
so let's get this underpass moving forward that
Good.
I think we've talked about, again, Al said, for the last 20 years. And then the interchange is the other one that's probably a little further behind. And then this bridge, we have to have you as city councils to want to move forward with something and agree on what next is to study and then come up with our cost share. So that's why I'm saying that's a third priority, because it'd be hard for us to go to the DOT now to say, help fund this when we haven't even decided what we're going to study.
And we're not going to decide if we don't discuss it. So what I'm hearing is March. And thanks for the discussion,
Yep.
Mr. Phelan. Yes, I'm ready to vote.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Grasser. Appreciate all your help. Item 2.5, Hate Crimes Ordinance Overview.
Mr. Costin?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Sandy. My partner Joe Quinn is here tonight because he took the laboring oar in drafting the memo, and I thought it might be appropriate just for him to summarize the memo for council members tonight, and if they had any questions regarding his memorandum.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn, good evening.
Good evening, Council President Sandy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the background kind of how we got to the memorandum in case the council members didn't get a chance to look at it. On January 24th, our office received an email from Council Member Dockler. She provided a first draft of the hate crime ordinances. The following day, we forwarded that email and the ordinances to the city prosecutor for her comments, since she would be the one that would be enforcing those ordinances. Her comments are summarized at the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2. Essentially, for criminal mischief, that crime has to be limited to crime of an intentional act of less than $100 or a reckless act of less than $2,000. She also said that she wouldn't pursue a hate crime designation on this unless it was pretty obvious, because with the hate crime charge, it requires proof of an additional element, which then runs the risk that the offender could be found not guilty of a hate crime and get away with a criminal act that could have been proven. She just couldn't prove that hate crime element. The same thing with the harassment. The only reason in which the prosecutor said she would pursue this is for that mandatory 30 days in jail, and we'll talk about the mandatory sentence later, but again, she said it'd have to be pretty obvious. The terrorizing charge, her comments were that the city shouldn't adopt this ordinance. The reason being is under state law right now, terrorizing is a Class C felony. City municipal courts are limited in their jurisdiction. They can only pursue charges of Class B misdemeanor and lower, which are infractions. So anything higher than a Class B misdemeanor has to go through a district court. So by enacting this, the hate crime would be lesser of a charge than could be pursued in the district court. And then simple assault, it's the same concerns, requires proving an additional element, and without really obvious facts, and she parentheticals that it would almost require an admission by the defendant before she would pursue a hate crime. And then last week, we were asked to draft hate crime ordinances, and then the following day, President Sandy, you requested that we draft alternative to drafting the proposed hate crime ordinances, that we provide a summary of state and federal laws so that the council could discuss this tonight. So then starting on page 3, what I did was, these are the 5 federal laws, hate crime laws, that could be applicable to similar actions as outlined in the hate crimes. I'll point out that the violent interference with federally protected right, that's the 4th point down. That was, if you remember, the Smiling Cafe that was firebombed, that was prosecuted federally under that one. The next is there are 2 state law crimes. The city prosecutor pointed these out that kind of cover similar actions. It's discrimination in a public place, and then preventing the exercise of civil rights. Going down to the next section on page 4, we have current municipal ordinances, not with hate crime designates. The city currently doesn't have a criminal mischief, a harassment, or a terrorizing municipal ordinance. If the city was to adopt them, again, you can't mirror the criminal mischief in a municipal ordinance. You'd have to limit it to $1,000 or $100 intentional act, or damages resulting in a reckless act of $2,000 or less. Anything more than that is Class A misdemeanor, all the way up to a Class B misdemeanor, which can't be charged out in municipal court. Same thing with harassment. State law harassment provides for 2 different types of harassment that are charged out as Class A misdemeanor. City can't charge out Class A misdemeanors, so it'd have to be limited to conduct that would classify as a Class B misdemeanor, and those are outlined on the top of page 5. Terrorizing, again, that's Class C felony. And then simple assault, the city does have a simple assault statute, and that does mirror the state statute. Then the next section I go through, the proposed hate crime municipal ordinances that were provided by Councilmember Dockler. I did change a little bit of the language just to make them gender neutral instead of referring to, it said, if he commits the offense, I made it a person or individual. And then I changed the penalty language just to make it standardized so that each one of them had the same standard penalty, which was the mandatory 30 days in jail and a maximum fine up to $1,500. For the criminal mischief, I want to point out that this one, under state law, like I said, it has to be, the municipal ordinance would have to be limited to...
Are we on page 3 now of the...
Or page 5, sorry.
Page 5.
Councilmember Weber. So criminal mischief for, under state law, Class B misdemeanor is limited to $100 intentional act or $2,000 reckless act. Because of a hate crime designee requires an intentional act based upon a protective class, then the hate crime ordinance would then have to be limited to $100 damage because you can't have an intentionally reckless act, if that makes sense. So, and then each one of those crimes has that mandatory 30 days in jail. And then going to page 7, I kind of outline the effect of enacting the proposed hate crime ordinances. Again, I talk about the limits of the municipal court's jurisdiction as far as what elements of each crime, the criminal mischief, the harassment, and the simple assault. I do point out that through Unicodes, you can go in and look at other ordinances from different cities. I looked at Devils Lake, Fargo, Jamestown, Lincoln, Mandan, Minot, Ray, Valley City, Velva, Wahpeton, and Watford City. They're the only ones that use Unicodes. The only one that has adopted a hate crime ordinance is Fargo. They have 3 hate crime ordinances, criminal mischief, a harassment, and a simple assault. Comparing these ordinances to the non-hate crime versions of those same crimes, there's no enhanced penalty as what was provided by Ms. Dockler. It is just the additional element. So again, you run that risk of, if you charge out a hate crime, you are adding elements to a law, or you are adding elements that you have to prove at trial in order to get a conviction. And there's no different penalty from criminal mischief, not hate crime, and criminal mischief, hate crime. Since its enactment in June of 2021, Fargo has only pursued this in one instance, and that is currently pending. It is simple assault, hate crime for a bar fight. Again, looking to the proposed hate crime ordinances, they do require a mandatory jail sentence. Right now it's drafted as a 30-day sentence. That's the maximum the city can pursue in a municipal court prosecution. This does raise concerns from a legal perspective because what it does is it increases the power of the executive branch of government, the city prosecutor, while taking away the discretion of the judges, the judicial branch of government. We have had talks with both the city prosecutor and the municipal judge concerning this, and that was one of the points that Judge Boucher raised. And then at the end, I end with basically an alternative to the proposed hate crimes, which is basically just hate crime enhancement. This allows for an enhancement of a sentence, and I put a proposal there and left it blank. It mirrors the North Dakota Century Code that does have enhancements for certain types of crimes. And then I left basically the number of days that have to be imposed blank. With that, in order to account for judicial discretion, the North Dakota Legislature also put in an exception there that a judge had the ability to go below a minimum mandatory if he found the specific circumstances of that defendant or that crime warranted a downward departure. So that's the information that I was able to put together for the council in short notice.
Thank you so much. Any comments? Ms. Dockler?
I do have comments. I would like to invite Mr. Sampson, a Grand Forks resident, though, to come forward and also speak on behalf of this because we worked closely together in bringing forward what we sent as a draft for review, and has largely been a part of this conversation. So at this time, I'd like to invite him to just kind of share some of that history and the background of why we started working on this.
Mr. Sampson, good evening.
So we started working on this because LGBTQ plus people are not included in the state's hate crime ordinances at all. They're federal, and then that's it for the state of North Dakota. So I'll start with some statistics from the Department of Justice. In 2020, the United States had 1,110 sexual orientation-based hate crimes, which is 20% of the total. In 2019, there's 1,195, which was 20% of the total. For gender identity, it was 2.7%, where there was 266 cases in 2020 and 198 cases in 2019. All these, 69% of all these crimes were against a person. The remaining were against property. This is also going with that only 15,138 agencies nationwide are voluntary reporting hate crimes to the FBI on the federal level. In the state of North Dakota in 2020, sexual orientation accounted for 3 out of the 21 total hate crimes reported. Gender identity accounted for 1 of the 21 total hate crimes reported. And in 2019, sexual orientation we had 3 reported hate crimes, and in 2018, we again had 3 hate crimes. And in North Dakota, only 3% of precincts report to the state and to the federal government, which includes the cities of Bowman, Fargo, Grand Forks, Mandan, Valley City, Williston, University of North Dakota, Grand Forks County, Burleigh County, McLean County, Montreal County, and Sargent County. For the city of Grand Forks, we found that in 2020, there was 1 LGBTQ plus hate crime committed, and then there was 1 in 2021 as well. According to the National Crime Victimization Survey, 56% of all hate crimes do not go reported to law enforcement, and 1 in 4 transgender people report being a victim of a hate crime or act of discrimination. The Department of Justice also goes into what the purpose of having a hate crime is, and that is because they have a broader effect than just the victim itself. It is the whole community that identifies in the same way as that victim. And if you delve into the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit agency that deals with mental health illnesses and issues in the LGBT youth community, they found that 16% of youth identify as LGBTQ. So this in theory would be 16% of our workforce here in Grand Forks. And they also found that these youth tend to leave their homes when they get older and move to places that actually have hate crime ordinances or other protections to keep them safe. So the FBI and the federal prosecution focus on cases that are bodily injury through fire, firearms, explosive, and sedentary devices, or dangerous weapons. If cases don't fit, they send them back to the local jurisdictions. And this is discussed in an Inform article that was published on February 11th of this year that discusses multiple hate crimes in Fargo that were sent to the federal government for review, and some of them were sent back to the city for them to take over, and they kept the ones that they were able to review. Having a hate crime ordinances are needed because they are at least a deterrence to that act of crime. First is a deterrent to many people to have a hate crime on their record as part of the label in theory. Second, having a higher mandatory penalty acts as a further deterrence because people don't like spending time in jail or prison. So just having a sentence enhancement does not act much for deterrence because it doesn't actually put the label on your crime in your criminal record. They're used in, mandatory sentences are used in certain laws. They're used in certain laws as a way to make it a greater deterrent for people who want to commit those laws. This is so case in DUI cases where there are mandatory sentences, mandatory education, mandatory alcohol testing, and driving suspensions, especially those that have to do with alcohol-related offenses. There are 4-day mandatory sentences that you get to serve in jail. The federal government even uses mandatory sentences of 10 years for federal hate crimes. So that's why we are bringing forward and asking for some sort of hate crime legislation in the city to protect those that the federal government will not bring forward. That way the city can step in and protect those that are protected classes.
Mr. Sampson, thank you. Ms. Dockler.
Just to go off of what Mr. Sampson shared as well, he covered some of this, but I wanted to share. North Dakota is one of a handful of states, as was indicated by both Mr. Sampson and Mr. Quinn, without effective hate crime laws. An attempt to pass a statewide law was rebuffed by state legislators this past session, and the city of Fargo was indeed the first and only city in North Dakota to pass an ordinance against hate crimes this past summer. While we no longer have the reputation of being number one for the most hate crimes per capita, as we held in 2013, we've been in the top 5 since 2012. The FBI reported in 2020 that 21 hate crimes were reported, with, again, only 3% of law enforcement agencies in the state reporting their data for collection, and coupling that with the fact that hate crimes themselves are severely underreported by victims, it does give a pretty devastating idea of what people within our communities in North Dakota, Grand Forks is not special to be different, we're a part of North Dakota, are actually experiencing in their everyday lives. I appreciate that we no longer have the distinction currently of being the worst in the country, but it also doesn't say much. So statistics aside, why are hate crime laws necessary? As with any law governing behavior, it sets clear expectations of what is and is not tolerated and establishes legal consequences when those offenses occur. Hate crimes are unique in that not only does it impact the individual, as Mr. Sampson was saying, but it also impacts the entire community with which that individual identifies. These drafted ordinances are not without significant input from individuals of varying backgrounds. They were not written just by Mr. Sampson and I. In fact, there are many individuals throughout the state of North Dakota, and including other elected officials, to justice-oriented organizations such as High Plains Fair Housing Center and the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition, to community members. It was important to all of us that what was brought forward tonight for consideration and discussion, because this is Cal, we're discussing right now. This isn't, we're making it and enacting it tonight. This is the first discussion. It was important to us that what we brought forward not be siloed from one perspective or experience. With that said, I'm grateful that council members have been willing to collaborate and bring forward a few amendments to the originally submitted draft that was sent to Mr. Gostin and to Mr. Quinn earlier this week, which I would like to share for consideration. Councilman Weigel asked if the protected classes included veteran status, which was a good point to highlight in tonight's conversation for everyone's shared understanding of what a protected class is. The feds define protected classes as individuals who identify in the following groups: race, color, religion or creed, national origin or ancestry, sex including gender, pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity, age, physical or mental disability, veteran status, genetic information, and citizenship. We would also ask that we change the word mandatory to maximum regarding jail time to give the city prosecutor and municipal judge the ability for professional discretion. And also that we possibly consider removing the terrorizing ordinance, as it currently is charged at a Class C felony, as previously discussed by Mr. Quinn, or consider working on the wording of the current drafted ordinance, as the current terrorizing statute does not include and thus does not protect LGBTQ individuals who may be impacted by such a hate crime. In regard to Mr. Goss's suggested, well, it's actually Mr. Quinn's suggested alternative, which may be found on page 10 of the Hate Crimes Ordinance Review, is that's attached to the agenda. One, the inclusion of the offender requiring a weapon or a gun to be in their possession and or have immediate access would, by the way that it is written, preclude hate crimes based on the idea that someone who physically attacks someone without a weapon or a gun, or have access to a weapon or a gun, would not then rise to the definition of a hate crime, whether the prosecutor has the evidence to charge it or not. Enhancements also, enhancements also depend on the prosecution, which could be the downside depending on what kind of person, which I think Mrs. Pettit is excellent, and so I'm not really worried about that, but we also know that positions change. Is very much to the discretion of the person that is holding that job at the time. However, I do understand that in some jurisdictions this may be easier as opposed to charging and prosecuting on a separate offense. And then third, however, the suggested exceptions to the judge outlined in the last paragraph certainly provide another avenue on top of prosecutorial discretion to enhance for diluting the intent of the enhancement, effectively just making it no point in having the enhancement. At this time, I guess I would open it up for further discussion and invite Mr. Sampson to also be a part of that.
Thank you. I think Mr. Quinn had a comment.
Thank you, President Sandy and Councilmember Doctor. I just wanted to make a clarification on that, where you're talking about the firearm, possession of firearm or in the immediate reach. That was what I was referring to there was the century code for the enhancement of a firearm. It was just the example. I wasn't proposing that that was a requirement for an enhancement for the hate crime.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Any comments or questions? Ms. Dockler, Mr. Sampson, City Attorney?
I have a question.
Sir, we're not holding a public hearing on this item.
On this issue?
You're welcome to come to the public hearing at next week's council meeting. We're not having a public hearing on this issue. Yes, Ms. Dockler.
Mr. Coachman, we'd be happy to have you back at the next meeting. Just per process for the council of the whole, we typically don't do public comments. That's just part of the process. I also want to point out as well that I really don't have any disillusions. Like this, hate crime ordinances are not going to solve all the problems that we have as a society. It's not going to conclusively result in everyone thinking, acting, or believing the same things. In fact, that's not what I want at all, and I think I've made that pretty clear in the last 3.5 years that I've served on council, that I'm not out to get freedom of speech by any means whatsoever. But I do believe that our actions have consequences to a certain degree, and as policymakers within our city, it is also our responsibility to make sure that we're trying to provide and create a community that is safe and inclusive to as many people as possible, whether that's through job development, whether that's through educational opportunities, whether that's through providing childcare or providing access to mental health resources or to food for the food insecure. I think that's all a part of our job. The goal is to reaffirm our 2017 Welcoming Inclusion Resolution. It's in the spirit of the Discontinued Welcoming Community Roadmap. I think that it actually speaks to what many of us ran for council in the first place, is that we wanted to create a better place for the people that live here. And this is a way for us to do that. These ordinances, they're built on the collective efforts, like I said earlier, of residents around the state and in Grand Forks proper, who continuously work to protect and support all of our community members, to create that substantive policy to codify actually being GF welcoming.
Thank you, Ms. Dockler. Mr. Sampson, did you have something to add to that? Or
Nope, I'm just staying up here in case there's questions.
I understand, no problem. Others interested in commenting? Mr. Weber?
Thank you, President Sandy. So I'm trying to understand the report that we're looking at, and to understand what it is we're being asked to discuss and maybe vote on. On page 12 of the document, I believe that's the ordinance that you're proposing?
It's the first draft that we sent in for review and conversation, because I am not law enforcement. I am also not a lawyer, and so I do respect other people's professions and institutions, and so this was part of beginning that conversation.
Very good, thanks. And then the first 10 pages, Mr. Quinn, are your reactions to what's been proposed? Is that a...
Councilmember Weber, it's, the 10 pages is just an outline of what the current state of the laws are, and then the possible effects of enacting the hate crime ordinances.
And I'm taking from page 10, I guess it's page 10, maybe it starts on page 9. Starts on page 9, what feels like a possible recommendation that instead of the ordinance or something like the ordinance that's been proposed, you're possibly recommending we consider an enhancement rather than an ordinance, or is that not an ordinance? Can you help me understand that?
Councilmember Weber, the reason that was put in there was because of some of the research and then the legal commentary on the mandatory sentences, and then in a reaction to the city prosecutor's comments that it would have to be really obvious before she would pursue that, because she did not want to risk letting somebody be found not guilty of a crime that they committed just because she couldn't prove the intent behind them. By doing the enhancement, she can prove the crime and then prove an enhancement to that crime. So that's the only reason I put it in there was to address the city prosecutor's comments and then the legal commentary on mandatory sentences.
Very good, thanks. In fact, one of my takeaways, and I'm stating this to check it out with you, is that current law actually does a better job than what we would be able to do under the proposed ordinance. In fact, if we were to pass the proposed ordinance, we could actually find someone guilty and they would be liable to less punishment than what current law allows.
Councilmember Weber, that is, so that would be the terrorizing that Councilmember Dockler said recommended removing, because that would be, we would have been limited to the city would have been limited to a Class B misdemeanor, where by state law it's a Class C felony. That also is applicable to criminal mischief. The criminal mischief in the proposed hate crime ordinances is willfully tampers with tangible property of another so as to endanger the person or property, and willfully damages tangible property. Now the issue is, by state law, depending on the value of that property, that can be up to a Class B felony. I wrote myself notes here, but intentionally in excess of $10,000 is a Class B felony, whereas like a Class A misdemeanor is if it's in excess of $2,000 recklessly or in excess of $100 intentionally. So without those value designees, then that would be accurate as well, is that by charging it under the city municipal ordinance, you're limited to what you can do.
Yes, would have been great. But I think the intention here is to send a message and to offer protection. And what I'm hearing from you, Joe, is that what's been proposed might send a message, but it's deeply problematic from a legal standpoint, and that the enhancement might be a way to go forward. Has, Ms. Dockler, has that been considered? Would that be something that you would consider? Thanks.
Mr. Weber, I actually just talked about the 3 issues that I have about that enhancement before you asked that question, and so I can go over them again. The 3 issues that I had regarding that enhancement, which Mr. Quinn cleared up as just being an example with the gun and weaponry. So if that's not attached to it, to make sure that that's a hate crime, that's good, that answers that question. But then 2, it does concern me, especially that last paragraph that suggests the exceptions for the judge provides another avenue on top of that prosecutorial discretion to dilute the intent of the enhancement. So if a judge can decide that, for example, this person who attacked another member in the community and was yelling racial and LGBTQ-based slurs at this individual, but had never done it before, the judge in question could say, well, you have a history of being an upstanding citizen. I'm going to waive this enhancement because I think that you can be a good person. And then it's up to their discretion at that point not to follow through. When even the city prosecutor obviously brought forward the enhancement because they had the evidence to support it. So the language of that enhancement, I have questions about and wouldn't mind continuing the conversation. However, I do think that with continued conversation, the hate crime ordinances are actually the best way forward. And I do think that when it comes to applying hate crimes, it's not that every crime that happens is going to have to go through the gauntlet. The victim also has autonomy in this conversation about what they would and they would not like to pursue when it comes to charges of a hate crime nature.
So at this point, you're really not interested in just going with the enhancement? You want to continue to pursue some version of the ordinance?
Correct.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Weber, other comments? Mr. Weigel?
I would just add one thing. I understand what you're saying, Ms. Dockler. And I think the same thing could happen on every crime that is charged out as a hate crime. In the fact that we see plea agreements daily for nearly everything in order to secure that conviction for somebody. And so I think while we could run into that issue with the enhancement, we're more than likely going to run into that issue as well with just the charging of the hate crime. In order, they could charge the hate crime and then run into an issue that you're trying to prove that additional element, and then what you're going to see is that a prosecutor is going to offer, or a defense attorney is going to come and say, hey, we're willing to take a plea agreement in the realm of we will take the criminal mischief charge if the hate crime is gone. And so I think we're going to see that no matter what we do, whether it's an enhancement or just a hate crime statute in general.
Ms. Dockler, comment?
Can I add one more thing?
Certainly, I'm sorry.
Mr. Quinn, if we have the enhancement, you could secure a conviction on the actual criminal mischief charge as well, or you can secure a conviction on the hate crime charge or on the criminal mischief charge and not necessarily secure one on the enhancement, right? So somebody could be found guilty of criminal mischief, but not the enhancement, correct?
Correct.
And so you'd still be able to keep that criminal mischief charge.
Correct.
Whereas on the other side of it with the ordinance, if they're found not guilty of the hate crime ordinance, that's done. We're done. It's over with.
Correct.
Other comments? Mr. Sampson, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are there any, you had a lot of statistics and it was great information. Are there any statistics that demonstrate how implementing a hate crimes ordinance has affected hate crime in other cities?
So what they do is they act as a deterrence, the actual hate crime, because of the labeling theory, as you get in criminal justice classes. As well, they act as a deterrence because people don't want the label on their criminal record. And that's why the actual hate crime reduces the average person. But I do not have actual statistics right now for you.
Okay, I'm trying to understand what exactly what's the purpose? What is the specific purpose of this?
The purpose of a hate crime is to act as a deterrence for people not to commit a crime based on prejudices.
So the deterrent is labeling people?
Labeling the hate crime and then add in a mandatory penalty that is higher than a normal penalty, which keeps people from wanting to actually do it.
Got it. So it seems to me that the purpose is then to punish. We're trying to punish people to change their behavior.
It's more meant for deterrence.
For deterrent.
You have a higher punishment to get people to deter from actually committing the crime.
Got it. Ms. Dockler, did you have a comment?
I would argue that most laws are like that, just because there's a law in place with consequences doesn't necessarily mean it's going to keep somebody from shoplifting at a felony type level. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to keep someone from being an arsonist. Doesn't necessarily mean, but they're in place in order to act as a deterrent and to arguably keep our communities safer. And I think that ordinances, laws, all of these things, they evolve with the times and what is going on. And as we become, we understand more how the lack of laws and deterrents impact socially justice impacted communities, then it comes forward that these kinds of laws and ordinances, enhancements, whatever you want to call them, legislation comes forward. I do think that it's really important that these kinds of things are available to individuals, again, giving the victim that opportunity of choice and advocacy and what has happened to them, because when they are a victim of a hate crime, that has been completely taken away from them. That's why they're there in the first place. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be prosecuted every single time, and certainly Mr. Quinn brought up that it has really only started to even possibly be something that's going on from the Fargo ordinances in this one case that's moving forward. And he referenced the bar fight. The bar fight was actually an individual that was beat up after repeatedly being followed around downtown by an individual who was using slurs based on his sexuality, and then beat him up. So in the instances in which it is applied and used, it matters. It may not matter when it's not being used, but it does matter to that person.
Thank you, Ms. Dogler. Other comments? Yep, Ms. Mott?
I apologize because I feel like this has probably been answered, but so do we not, if we put this in place as an ordinance, are you saying that you'd maybe have the simple assault charge, and then your worry is that with the hate crime ordinance as well, we can't prosecute for the initial crime? Because does this layer on top, or does this layering on top then hurt our chances to prosecute for anything?
Vice President Mock, so the way it goes with the hate crime ordinances, and I'll use Fargo's because it's they're simple. So, or I'll use the simple assault as an example. Okay. So if you look on the bottom of page 6, that is the simple assault hate crime. It mirrors the simple assault city ordinance as written, except for it adds number 3, which is on the top of page 7. Okay? So right now, if an individual was charged with simple assault, the city prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt elements 1 or 2. That there's willfully causes bodily injury to another human being, or negligently causes bodily injury to another human being by means of firearm, destructive device, or weapon. That's all that needs to be proven for simple assault. Okay. With the hate crime simple assault, the prosecutor would have to prove that, and then prove that the offense was committed in whole or in part because of the actual or perceived race, color, religion, gender, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, or ancestry of the victim. So it's an additional element that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt before they can get a conviction for simple assault hate crime. So if it's charged out as simple assault hate crime, that element has to be proven, where the same conduct can be charged out as simple assault, and that doesn't have to be proven. Okay. That's the distinction, that's the difference.
So if we pass this, would the option still stand to just pursue the simple assault if that's what someone thought had taken place, or they thought that they couldn't prove the hate crime?
So, Vice President Mock, yes. Right now, the city has a simple assault ordinance. If the simple assault hate crime ordinance was passed, there would be 2 ordinances for simple assault. The city does not have a criminal mischief ordinance or harassment ordinance. So that would be up to the city council to determine whether or not they want a criminal mischief, not hate crime, and a criminal mischief, hate crime. Same with harassment. Harassment, not hate crime, and harassment, hate crime.
Okay, and that would give those prosecutors those avenues to say, I can't prove this in this case, but I can prove it in this case, and they can pursue those legal remedies as they see fit.
Correct, and that would be back to the city prosecutor's comments of why she would, the only reason, she said that it'd have to be pretty obvious, and then the reason that she would do it was to pursue that mandatory sentence, because either way, if it's a criminal mischief, not hate crime or hate crime, you're still limited in municipal court to a Class B misdemeanor, which has a maximum penalty of 30 days in jail and or a $1,500 fine.
Ms. Mock, any other comments? Mr. Quinn, I have yet to see or hear of or know of an assault that doesn't have an element of hate to it, regardless of who is involved. I'm all for taking care of the people of Grand Forks and wanting everyone to know that we believe in them and want them protected. If there's a way for us to have an enhanced penalty for an assault, could we do it for all assaults? You know, because all we're doing is labeling something hate, and hate has so many different, the spur of the moment, I hate you, right? I mean, I might not hate you, I have 17 drinks, now I hate you. I don't know, these things happen, right? But if we're, so we can label it whatever you want to, but if all of a sudden there's hate and I hate Kyle because he's wearing a blue jacket and I hate blue this minute and I punch him, is that not, can I not get an enhanced sentence as well, or shouldn't I?
Council President Sandy, I guess that's a policy question for the city council, but I would like to point out, when we're talking about enhanced sentence, in this instance, because it is municipal court, we are limited to 30 days in jail and or up to 30 days in jail and or $1,500 fine. You cannot enhance that penalty more than that. That is what the city is limited to. So you have to be careful with that enhanced penalty. The only thing that would happen would be if there was a mandatory sentence as an enhancement.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Gossett.
Again, just one comment with respect to that. It would seem to me that the enhancement would be in the discretion of the judge. Depending on type of conduct, they could, with the limitations, right? He can impose the penalties up to that, to the limitations. So the enhancement would be the judicial discretion that we've given to Judge Boucher and prior municipal judges up to this point.
Any other, yeah, Ms. Stock?
The hate that you're explaining about a color in this situation, being drunk and fighting about a color, does not fall under a protected class for individuals that have historically been persecuted and had a disadvantage within our communities in the United States for a very, very long time. The EDA grant that we're going after is supporting social justice impacted individuals. Something like a hate crime ordinance that also protects them and supports them should something happen only goes to show our commitment, and actually in other avenues like economic development also serves to bring more dollars into our community and support our business, families, all of these folks. So really, again, the hate crime ordinances, as we're talking about them, they're not meant to replace the ordinances that we have, just as Mr. Quinn was explaining. They're there as an additional option. If it is quite clear that somebody is being screamed at with racial epithets while they're being beat, or when their home is burglarized and it's sprayed all over their house, then the city prosecutor, with that evidence, could move forward with that piece. If it's not there, then obviously they're going to charge with the other one if they can just prove that there was criminal mischief or simple assault or whatever it may be, then they won't pursue the additional hate crime piece. But again, the laws and the ordinances that are created as hate crimes are there as a deterrent, like any other law that we create in this world to create order of some sort or another.
Right, Ms. Stockler, and I agree with all that, and there's no argument anyone can make that doesn't, agree that that's logical, but why wouldn't we be trying to deter all?
I would say that we are. We already have a city ordinance that talks about simple assault. Now we're
But if we're going to
specifying-
add an enhancement for an additional punishment, just because I don't, Mr. Sampson or Mr. Quinn or anyone else, if somebody is transgender and they get punched in the face, is it any worse than Danny Weigel getting punched in the face?
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
I understand
yeah,
that that's,
yes. You've
and-
just proven the point.
Yes, but why shouldn't the person that punches Danny Weigel in the face also get the same additional sentence? Mr. Weigel, or I'm sorry, Mr. Kavami.
Thank you. So I really appreciate all the work that was done here. So we've talked about the best case scenario, which is deterrence, right? Creating a culture where people don't do these things. That's great. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that, I would hope, right? We all should protect all members of our citizens, regardless of any category. And I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that I don't understand. Like I'm not one of, I'll never understand the pain that other people have felt. So I get that, right? So let's establish that, let's protect people. Okay, cool. So now let's say do no harm. So what's the negative? So if we do this, is our biggest risk that someone goes unpunished? What's the negative, right? We've heard what the positive is, but what's the negative?
Councilmember Kwame, that would be, that is a potential negative, and that the city prosecutor has pointed out because of that additional element.
So worst case scenario, we're passing city code that doesn't ever get used, hopefully, right? And it just seems like if we give people another tool to use or not use, that doesn't seem like it's that bad of a thing to do, right? And maybe it never gets used, and that's great. I think that I would prefer to see an enhancement where we could try to get the best odds of persecuting someone that did wrong. But in the absence of that, let's just move forward. And if this never gets used, great. But if it does, and it needs to be something there, that's fine. So I would move approval. That was a little bit emotional, so I'm gonna backpedal that one and let us continue to talk.
Okay. Yeah. Other comments? Ms. Stockler, yes?
I would second his approval, his motion.
I don't know what. Yeah, there wasn't any substance to that, so. Yeah, okay. I think ultimately, we as a group need to provide guidance to our city attorney's office as to how we want them to proceed, whether it's working on the minutia of Ms. Dockler's proposed and Mr. Sampson proposed language, or fine-tuning an enhancement, or changing, we're going to get tough on crime and changing it all to be the most extensive as possible. Yes, Ms. Stockler.
Mr. Quinn, if we move forward with the ordinances, the hate crime ordinances, would we also be able to do the enhancement as well, or is it either or?
Councilmember Dockler, I guess I can't see why you wouldn't be able to do both. But it's the end result of what would happen as far as you're still limited, right? In the penalty aspect of it. So the city council wouldn't be limited in one option, but they would be duplicative of each other.
Thank you.
Mr. Weber? Yes, sir?
If I could propose for you, Mr. Kwame, the motion, and Ms. Dockler, could the motion be kind of a simple green light that the council is in favor of learning more about this and moving in the direction of what has been proposed, and to consider a next generation of this proposal at council next week? This would require 2 ordinances. Whether it's an ordinance or an enhancement, it's going to require 2 readings, right? And Mr. Gaustad, would that have to come back to COW?
If I'm hearing you correctly, Councilmember Weber, is you want our office to maybe massage the language that Ms. Dockler has provided and provide an alternative enhancement ordinance for consideration at next week's city council as a first reading?
I'm not the one who made the motion. That would work for me. I'm looking to the 2 who made the motion and seconded it.
So again, what's the harm if we, I mean, other than the legal bill, right? We're going to have to pay money to have you guys do that. So I don't know if it's an enhancement or not. Let's just do something, right? So I would say I would feel stronger about let's pass a revision of the ordinance presented in a way that holds up to where we have the maximum ability to prosecute. And if the prosecutor chooses not to use that, then that's great. Then they can use the other one. So let's do it. I don't think it needs to be an enhancement. I think let's just do the ordinance.
I would second that.
I'm not 100% sure I understand what that is.
So I would second if,
Move forward with the ordinance presented for us to review at council.
Without input of the city attorney prior to next week?
No, with input from the city attorney and prosecutor and all parties that should be involved.
Mr. Weber?
Could I try offering one more layer of squishy clarification?
Sure.
That the intention is to send a message of support to oppressed or disadvantaged populations in our community covered by federal hate crimes legislation, to send a message of support and to look for possible means to offer further protection. And if the work that's done between now and next Monday furthers that, that's what we would consider at next week's discussion. Again, is that another layer of, sure. And I got yes on both sides. I think, President Sandy, we have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Yes, Mr. Veen?
Just a question, then next Monday would be the first reading then? Is that what we would have? And then when would the public hearing be on it?
It'd be
The second hearing, which would be the next city council meeting.
Would be.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so the public won't have an opportunity to respond. We'll talk about it both now at the next city council, and then we won't have a committee of the whole, but we won't go to the committee of the whole between the two. It'll come back to the final city council meeting.
As the way I understand the
that
motion.
would be the timeline based upon our traditional process. Ms. Dockler?
that's not to say that we couldn't bring it back to another COW if we wanted to, and that was the decision of the council to do so. I mean, this is our meeting. However, that's standard procedure. The 2 readings, there's ample time for people to call, to email, to talk in person, and state what they support or they don't support or any of their suggestions. Definitely next month, as was discussed earlier, or next week on Monday, as was discussed earlier, people are invited to come to council and speak their piece on this agenda item, just as individuals who are also here tonight for Fufang are doing the same thing. At council, that's when we take those public comments. So they would have those 3 weeks to do that, and that would also include our public hearings as well.
So as a citizen comment, though, they could talk at the end of the meetings.
They could speak at the end of the council meeting or unless the mayor decides to open it up for comment during that item. Yes. Yes, Ms. Dockler?
Not to belabor the point about commenting, but they can also email and ask that it be included in the public record if they would choose to do that way instead. So there is every opportunity to engage on any of these agenda items for council at any time, regardless of what it is that we're talking about.
Ms. Dockler, a quick comment or question for you. Personally, I think we should look out for and take care of everyone. And I'm all for taking care and looking out for certainly the protected classes. But I, for one, if we're going to try to get tough on crime, I, for one, would prefer to see us move forward with an ordinance that applies to everyone, because if the goal is to dissuade people from committing crimes, if we increase the penalty to everyone, shouldn't that not only dissuade people from doing hate crimes, but also people that would just be committing crimes in general? I didn't ask you, Mr. Weber, but you certainly can respond.
Thank you, President Sandy. This idea that hate is just hate is actually a debate that's largely been settled at the federal level. The Federal Department of Justice says that the term hate can be misleading. When used in a hate crime, the word hate does not mean rage, anger, or general dislike, as you have insinuated. In this context, hate means bias against people or groups with specific characteristics that are defined by law. And those crimes are perceived as being perpetuated to further intimidate and harass those protected classes. It's not the same as you and I ticking someone off at the bar and getting beat up. That's a simple assault. This is about harassing people based upon these characteristics and to further create a climate of fear for those individuals.
Absolutely. I still don't understand how implementing additional penalties for everyone changes the fact that we're trying to take care of people that are disadvantaged, but understood. Ms. Dockler?
If true equality in the way that people were treated and were able to move around in the world and in the communities that we have, if that was true, then a ordinance that just charged simple assault would be enough. What we have seen, based on the data that is reported by only 3% of our law enforcement in North Dakota, is that we continually per capita rise to the top of hate crimes based on protected classes. Until we're able to exist in the same spaces, in the same way, and in the same freedom, and we could argue for days about this, and we have got a lot to talk about. But that's why we're going to continue having this conversation moving forward for City Council. But the point being, it's not the same. It just isn't the same reality for some individuals in certain spaces as it is for others in certain spaces. And if we can come to an understanding, we don't necessarily have to understand that person's experience that's different than ours from a personal level. And it shouldn't matter if it impacts us in a direct individual way, if we know that's actually impacting people in our community that are coming and saying that it impacts them, that it happens in their everyday life, that these incidents occur. Why are we pushing back so hard to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, it's not my intent. Why are we pushing back to say so hard that it's not important enough to address on the nose? Why do we have to say, all of us, yes, all of us matter, all of us should be able to live the lives that we have crafted for ourselves, that we dream for ourselves, that we work hard for ourselves. Yes, that should be the case. It isn't always the case. for people who move through this world that identify in protected classes. And again, protected classes, it's not just race, it's not just your sexual orientation, it includes veteran status, it includes ethnicity, it includes religion or creed, it includes many things where I think people, if they think about it, could possibly be impacted. It just, and Mr. Kwame was talking about being emotional, it deeply saddens me to think that we can't come to an understanding for members within our community that their experiences may be more difficult based on one of these things that puts them into a protected class, and so they need extra measures of protection because they just don't have the same. That would be my answer to you on why this is needed versus saying, let's put a mandatory $30,000 charge, and this is obviously being facetious, so I apologize, to something, because it's not reasonable. But for those individuals that are directly impacted for those reasons, it's really important, even if, as Mr. Kwame says, hopefully it's never used. But when it is used, it sends a very, very strong message and acts as a deterrent for future issues that may happen within our community. And it's not just Grand Forks. I guarantee you that other places are also watching. That's what happens. Grand Forks could be a leader on this. We could be progressive in how we welcome people into our community and how we build it.
Mr. Weigel?
Mr. Sampson's question for you, just to get your perspective. We all agree the penalties are equal, right? Whether it's a criminal mischief or criminal mischief hate crime at this point. If we don't go with the mandatory 30 days in jail. So each of them are equal. Do you feel that putting the hate crime attachment makes people feel safer?
I think it gives people the option of knowing that they have the option of using the hate crime. And it's also acts as a deterrence to keep people from actually committing that crime that they might actually commit. Because right now there is no protections for a lot of classes in the state. And so I think it would make a difference.
Maybe I'm trying to think of a good way to word it, because we all agree that they're equal in the fact of penalty. 30 days in, up to 30 days in jail, and what was it, $500 fine, $1,500 fine. So they're equal. But what you're saying is that by putting the label on there, that's what's going to deter people from committing that crime, correct?
A majority of people, I'm not going to say all people.
Okay.
Because as you know, work in certain fields.
Yep. Okay.
Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Mott?
Did you say that, I think you said we didn't have harassment and maybe one other of the charges? With that draft language, would we also see, like you said, the crime itself and then the hate crime as like the third option? Would we also see that as a potential change to consider?
Vice President Mock, I can do it any way the council directs me to. If they want me to include the same crime with a non-hate crime designation and a hate crime designation, I'd be happy to do that.
That would offer the most flexibility, right, for the prosecutor, depending on evidence?
I believe so.
Yes, Mr. Weigel.
Ms. Mock, are you referring to terrorizing, or was that still struck from, or is that only the harassment?
I thought there were two that had been pointed out that weren't currently in there, so I was just wondering if we were going to get an option to see those as potential charges and then the hate crime option as well.
And Councilmember Weigel, my understanding is we were removing the terrorizing one because that is a Class C felony. And then the city also didn't have a criminal mischief or harassment. The only, out of the 4 ordinances, the only one that the city currently has is a simple assault ordinance. So my understanding, my direction is now to provide a criminal mischief, harassment, both non-hate crime, hate crime, and then a simple assault, hate crime.
the harassment century code is an A misdemeanor according to state law, so it's already more severe than the B misdemeanor that we could implement.
There's two aspects of harassment that are B misdemeanor.
Okay,
So that would be what it would be limited to.
thank you.
Good discussion tonight. So I don't know if we need to amend the motion to include the criminal mischief, hate crime and not hate crime, and harassment, hate crime and not hate crime, or if you think it was covered already. Mr. Quinn, thank you. Very good. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Well, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion carries. Sandy dissents. Moving on. Item 2.6, Fufeng Wet Corn Mill. Mr. Phelan.
Council President Sandy, we're going to kind of give you the Fufeng story. Keith Lund is going to start out and talk about the economic development opportunity. He will also have some partner agencies here and how we got to. Mr. Gostad and I are going to take it from when Keith ends up, and we're going to just talk about the development agreement and what we've been doing to help support the project. So with that, I'd ask Keith to start off, and then Dan and I will pick up.
Mr. Lund, good evening.
Wrong one. Thank you, Todd. Mr. Phelan, President Council Sandy, pleasure to be here this evening. What's that? I've been asked to spend a little time with you this evening talking a little bit about how we got to this point and to share with you, I guess, our excitement from the Economic Development Corporation about this, what we think is a tremendous opportunity for the region. Specifically, within my presentation, I'm going to address some comments and concerns that have been addressed over the last couple of weeks, specifically about the foreign investment aspect of this, and then also relative to the benefits to the agricultural community. I do have a couple of individuals, three in particular, that's going to help in this presentation that will, I think, can share a perspective that I can't provide. So hope you'll indulge that as well. So just really by starting, I want to really, on behalf of the EDC Board of Directors, thank you for your support of the Economic Development Corporation. We're proud to be a partner with you to help grow the community and the region from an economic development standpoint. Our mission is pretty simple. To expand economic opportunity for the citizens of the Grand Forks region through industry growth and diversification. I think the last part of that statement is really key. Our job really is to grow and expand industry in our region. We operate and we target strategic sectors of our economy. Any strong economic development platform will really try to leverage the key assets, what you do well as a region, strengths, and also emerging strengths. And in terms of our core sectors, historical sectors, agribusiness and manufacturing are those two. And unmanned and autonomous systems are probably a little bit beyond emerging. Energy and environment, technology, and biomedical. Those are all really attached to expertise and talent at the University of North Dakota. So we're here talking about agribusiness, which really, as of late, has really been one of our leading sectors. And I think over my 15 years or so with the EDC has been the area that we've seen the most capital investment in our region. I want to talk a little bit about the term value-added agriculture. I'm not going to read this. You're able to do that. There was a comment last week or the week before that this project is not value-added ag. I think the Fufeng development is absolutely value-added ag. I think it fits all three of the definitions that are here this evening. And to just say that this project is not value-added ag is to say that Simplot is not value-added ag. So I think we can all agree that that statement is false. I also want to state that all regions, Upper Midwest target as a state, and most organizations and communities that have an economic development strategy target value-added ag as a strategy for growth in terms of adding value to crops that they grow. I want to talk a little bit about the project itself.
The EDC, any economic development organ, including the Grand Forks Region EDC, develops opportunities, works on opportunities that come from a myriad of sources. We can develop those through personal networks, with the supply chain networks, with local industry in terms of expansion as well. Business conferences and trade shows, although I would say of the last categories that would be the least. And in the case of this project, which was titled Project Peony, and initially that came from the state of North Dakota, it is not at all uncommon for large projects to work at the state level, to try to understand the business climate, to understand the resources that are available, and once they feel that that's a state that they want to potentially do business in, then that opportunity is presented to communities within that state, and that's exactly how this one transpired. Fufeng, Project Peony, actually did work through a North American site selector. You see on the screen here, Biggins, Lacey, Shapiro and Company. They're a site selector that works primarily in North Dakota and through partnerships internationally, and they have offices across the United States. I want to highlight the revised June 19, 2020 statement, and for this reason. It had been suggested that, that the Fufeng Company had really targeted Grand Forks for reasons other than our ability to serve the project from an infrastructure standpoint, from a feedstock standpoint, from a business climate standpoint. This map here is what was in the original request for proposals that was issued, that was sent to the Department of Commerce that they were asked to send out. Notice in the red outline that Grand Forks County was not identified as actually a geography in which the project was seeking. Only through the intervention of the Department of Commerce to ask them to expand that geographic search was the county of Grand Forks and the northern part of the Red River Valley included in that search. So really, I bring that up for two reasons. I think I brought up one of them. The first one really is to really recognize and thank the North Dakota Department of Commerce for their advocacy on behalf of our region and the northern Red River Valley, but also really, I think, to dispel the notion. I think the fact or the assertion that that we were targeted from the very beginning, I think this, to me, is evidence that that was not the case. Again, the company nor the site selector, they are not the ones that expanded geography. Our state Department of Commerce did that. We received this proposal on June 19th. We were a little we had 13 days to respond, so that was a tight time frame, and I'm happy to say that we did that in 7 days. I want to recognize, even though he's not here tonight, Brandon Baumgach from the EDC, who really took the lead on pulling all the information together. And when I say pulling all the information together, this is the information, and that's been revised over time, but this is the information you've seen before that we needed to respond to. It's not an exhaustive list that was in the request for proposal, but these are the key elements that we needed to demonstrate that this region could support if we were to really have an opportunity to secure the project. There's been some talk about the project site. I wanted to address that in terms of how those things unfold. First of all, when projects are looking at land and when the EDC is helping support them in that endeavor, we take a look at zoning or future zoning. We take a look at areas that have like businesses. That's an element of zoning, but nevertheless, we take a look at what's in the proximity. Infrastructure availability, or the ability to extend infrastructure to the site, and then available land. At the end of the day, we need to have willing sellers for the land. I think this is my opportunity to underscore what the mayor said last week, that there is no city involvement in the purchase whatsoever, no city resources. This is a 100% company to private landowner sales transaction. So there's no city involvement whatsoever. In terms of feature zoning, I don't know that I have a pointer, but hopefully you can kind of find your way on this map a little bit. The area, and Mr. Brooks brought this up last week, the area this project is considering is either zoned industrial, and agribusiness is a subset of manufacturing and industry, or there's a small component of that which is ag, which, as communities grow, are then rezoned to appropriate uses. So the zoning is appropriate, or future zoning. In terms of like businesses, just wanted to show you kind of a little bit of the lay of the land, pardon the pun, in terms of the businesses that are in this region. I don't need to read them all, but you certainly have J.R. Simplot, Philadelphia Macaroni, Red River Biorefinery, North Dakota Mill. If you'd pan out a little further, you'd see American Crystal Sugar in East Grand Forks. You'd see other businesses further north as a map as well. Okay, that's really how the RFP unfolded and how we sort of got to this point.
In terms of the responses, let me pause for a second. We were told that there were approximately 40 responses to that request for proposal. We learned that from the site selection company. I don't know if that reconciles with the number the company has, but that's what we were told from the site selector. And we were also told that there were 25 viable sites that had some level of analysis. I don't know that how extensive some of those sites were. Maybe they were, really set aside pretty quickly, but there were 25 proposals that had some element of a second look at them, and Grand Forks obviously was one of those sites. So we were told in September of 2000 that we were going to receive a site visit from the company, and this site visit was really coordinated by the site selector company. And they came to Grand Forks in October of 2020. We were one of 4 sites at that time, so we had gone from 40 to 25 to 4. Exciting for the organization and for the community. It's when we first had an opportunity to meet Eric Truderush, the COO, as well as the Director of Human Resources, Mary Armstrong, made that trip along with 2 or 3 representatives from the site selection company. It was a pretty big deal. The state, as I mentioned, the project started at the state of North Dakota Department of Commerce, recognizing the opportunity that it was for the region. When we alerted them that there was going to be a site visit, they wanted to participate, and they participated in a big way. We had several hours of direct participation from the Lieutenant Governor and really support throughout this entire process. And you could see the other departments of the state of North Dakota that spent significant amount of time on those 2 days. It was a 2-day site visit, a pretty intense 2 days. Day 1 was really focused on the site and the infrastructure that existed and the ability to extend and serve from that standpoint. Day 2, I want to underscore this, was workforce. There's been some discussion about the region's ability to serve the project from a workforce standpoint. The company insisted, and the site selector on behalf of the company insisted that we bring education providers and training providers to understand the partnerships that would be created. And then they said, we want to meet with industry. We don't want to hear from the EDC or the city, essentially the hired help, that what the labor market is like. We want to hear from companies in Grand Forks. We had 7 different companies participate directly and have conversations with Mr. Truderush, their human resource director, as well as the site selection company. 7 companies that represent over 1,600 employers that employ 1,600 employees in our region. That would have been an opportunity for those employers to say, this just isn't going to work. We can't do this. Labor's too tight. And each and every company I sat through those said, labor's the same everywhere. But if you pay your people well, treat them right, we can grow together. And they did not discourage them. In fact, they encouraged them to move forward in the project and invest in Grand Forks. And beyond anything that I can say about workforce, the fact that those companies who really are going to compete for labor, encourage them to move forward, I think is extremely powerful. Well, we left that, and we thought we showed them a we thought we showed them really the best of Grand Forks and the state of North Dakota, and we hoped that we'd get another call. We'd hope we get another call, and the right call, and we did. So they let us know that they're going to be coming for a second visit, and that happened in March of 2021. This one was just a little bit different. They didn't want the state of North Dakota involved, and they didn't want to really have a big to-do. They really wanted to get to know the community. We were told at that time, I'm not sure if it was before or when they came, but we were one of 3 at that time, so we made one of 4 to one of 3. They really wanted to get to know the community. So they met with some community leadership, had a tour of the community so they could appreciate the assets that we have. And I think we had some conversation about their interest in understanding whether this was an attractive community that could attract people from a workforce standpoint. And so that was really the focus of the second site visit in March of 2021. We left that meeting. We felt pretty good about that as well. We did get a call and said that we're coming for a third visit. That happened in July of 2021. We were down to 1 of 2 finalists. And the primary purpose of that site visit was to really confirm
and discuss some and clarify some of the key proposal elements that were in front of them. Many of them that you've discussed and many that have evolved within the development agreement as well as the pilot. And again, this was an opportunity for the state of North Dakota really to participate as well as many local leaders and city departments and staff that Mr. Phelan and the mayor coordinated. It was really quite an effort. So the North Dakota Department of Commerce, the Tax Department, and Job Service North Dakota were a part of that site visit. We felt pretty good about that, and actually then on October 27th, that was the date of the Northern Valley Career Expo, otherwise I don't know that I remember it. Mayor Basinski was notified that Fufang had the intention to develop their wet corn mill in Grand Forks, and not long after that coordinated an interview and an announcement in the Grand Forks Herald on November 6th. There was a fourth site visit after that announcement, and that happened in November of 2021. The purpose of that really was to really continue to talk about the development agreement and some of the key elements of the ability for the community to serve it. We had the opportunity at that time to meet Zuchin Lee and met with community leadership. And you see a photo here that we had an opportunity to tour a regional farm, and they met with a local grain terminal as well. Really the indication was they needed to work together to be successful in the region. And you've really been a part of understanding the negotiations and discussions that have occurred really since that point. I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about the foreign investment aspect of this, and I have someone here that's going to help with that conversation. Before I talk to this slide, I just want to mention that foreign direct investment, FDI, for those that have heard that term, is a strategy that's prioritized, number one, by the United States through the Department of Commerce, and through many states and many larger communities in the United States. It's really an opportunity to attract outside capital, outside wealth into your community. There's only so much money, wealth that's within a community, and so the goal of economic development is to bring additional resources to your community, hire people, make those investments, and really to build and to grow. Whether you're talking about Volkswagen and Tallahassee, Airbus in Mobile, Alabama, or Fufang and Grand Forks, it's all about foreign direct investment is about what we're talking about today. Fufang is a global company. You've heard this before, doing business in 115 countries, including the United States, has been doing it for many, many years. The company has a diverse customer base that we've gone over before. I won't read them, but I think you would recognize each company on this list. We've mentioned this before. Fufang is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. What we haven't really talked about is that U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has a supervisory relationship with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, so there is oversight and some level of regulation with respect to their being on that exchange. There are a number of institutional investors that are current investors in Fufang. You see them: Vanguard, Fidelity, Mellon, BlackRock. Those are all heavily regulated industries and companies. Continuing on the conversation, Fufang USA was established in the year 2000. They actually have a wholly owned subsidiary that's been operating in the United States for a decade. Biotech out of California, First Biotech out of California. Both of these organizations have filed taxes in the United States, and both have established international banking accounts that have been capitalized by the parent and by large banks in the United States that, again, are very regulated. And as we move forward in this process, Fufang is going to need to file many local, state, and federal applications or permits. There will continue to be due diligence and oversight over the company and the project as this moves forward. Should you move forward with a development agreement at the end, I'll ask you to do that. I want to bring a friend up to chat a little bit, Mr. Drew Combs, who is the Executive Director of the North Dakota Trade Office. It's really his role as individually and as an organization to promote import and export activity for the benefit of North Dakota. He engages with international firms on a daily basis, and as part of his role is to understand the players that are on the global stage. So if I could have Mr. Combs address the committee, please. Thank you.
Mr. Combs, good evening.
Thank you. Council President, members of the council, for the record, my name is Drew Combs. I'm the Executive Director of the North Dakota Trade Office. On behalf of the Grand Forks Region Economic Development, we were asked to do what we label our bad guy search. We have a program that searches through, I think, 30 databases and looks for bad actors. To give you an idea of what we're looking for is fraud, any issues with security issues with the security exchange or anything like that. I believe you have copies of those reports. We didn't find anything on Fufang. So that's our role. In FDI, which is foreign direct investment, the North Dakota Trade Office takes a back seat to the Department of Commerce, but we assist in that mission. So stand for any questions you had.
Any questions for Mr. Combs? Ms. Mott, yes?
So does the Department of Commerce, is that at the federal level or is that at the state level?
Mr. President, Councilwoman, yes, when I say Department of Commerce, I'm talking about the North Dakota Department of Commerce.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Weber?
Yeah, in summary, Fufang has been vetted by your department.
Mr. President, Councilman Weber, that's exactly right. And I'm going to give you a disclaimer. So when we do those bad guy searches, I like to talk about a cake, a 6-inch cake, and it's got the frosting and the candles on the top. We shave off about the top 3 inches of that cake. So you're always going to have that bottom piece that didn't come up in a search. It's just the best we can do. And I'll give you an example. When the pandemic started 2 years ago, because of our access to foreign markets and those databases that I'm talking about, we were asked by the state to help vet PPE gear for the massive needs of PPE that was coming into the state. So we ran just hundreds of them on the bad actors. And I can promise you that we caught a lot of the bad actors. You wouldn't believe how many of those we came. In these databases that we're searching through, they're international. So it's not just focused on the United States or North America, it's global.
So the North Dakota Trade Office has vetted Fufang?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Ms. Mott?
Is there any chance that it would have gone to you for vetting and the federal government would have concerns beyond what you've found?
Mr. President and Councilwoman Mock, yeah, you're correct. The federal government, that's a different thing, and whoever's monitoring all this stuff, they're probably doing the same thing. And they probably have better databases, to be honest with you.
So you wouldn't have received it if they had concerns at that level?
No,
if they
ma'am.
would have caught that before, it would have been up to you to look at it for North Dakota?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. Very much appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you. Mr. Lund?
Thank you, Mr. Combs. Just in summary, I'd just like to say this is a large, very well-known company, high visibility. Make that statement before moving on. There's been discussion about farmer engagement in the process. I want to just mention that has been the case since the very beginning. As a matter of fact, we had agricultural producers participate in that very first site visit in October of 2020 that I talked about. There's been no one that's been more involved than someone I probably don't have to introduce a whole lot. Mr. Paul Spruill has been involved, as I mentioned, in that and subsequent conversation with the company and really promoting the region and helping us secure the project at least to where we are today. So I've asked Mr. Spruill, who is well experienced and well known by many, to come up and share his thoughts about the project and really the benefits to the agricultural community.
Mr. Spruill, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again.
Council President, thank you, and council members, thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak today. Looking at the project that we're looking at doing, what Fufang is looking at doing here, I want to step back a minute and look at value-added ag. And actually, I'm going to step back. October of this year will be 100 years since the state mill has been built. When you look at value-added ag, look at what the state mill has done to North Dakota. More importantly, what it has done for Grand Forks. Today, I checked the markets. Today, when I left the office, the markets were $9.62, Minneapolis market. That's what the state mill is paying today. I checked the market in Minot today, it's 50 cents less. I checked the market at Plus. Checked the market in Devil's Lake today, it's 30 cents less. I checked the market in Harvey today at Arthur Companies, it's 45 cents less. So when you have agriculture in your community, a processing facility, it adds humongous value to the producer. No question about it. If it's corn, if it's soybeans, or if it's wheat, they all add value. So for the state mill, for what it does today, they grind today, and they started out with 10,000 bushels. Today they're doing 100,000 bushels a day. And they only store 4.8 million bushels, but they consume, or they mill 36 million bushels a year. So where does that stuff come from? Where does the grain come from? How are they supported? I've heard comments that this is going to negatively impact our local co-ops. It is not. It is not going to happen. Because of what goes on, our local co-ops and elevators, be it Honeyford, Forest River, Reynolds, Hoople, wherever they come from, they have contracts. They come from Crystal, from Columbia, they come from Arvilla. They come here daily and drop their grain on contracts they have, and it comes through those terminals. They can't take 36 million bushels at one time at that facility. So, and also the state mill employs, as of last October, 159 people, and that's great for our community. So when I look at the corn plant that we're looking at that's coming here from Fufeng, and I'm excited about it, I'm truly excited about it. There's a lot of controversy, but I'm excited about it, and a lot of my friends and fellow producers are also. Because if you look at what the state mill does, that 36 million bushels they process, that's 720,000 acres of grain, which is about 12% of North Dakota's production at 50 bushels, but this year we came in at 48. When I look at what Fufeng is doing, or their proposed is 25 million bushels, but an average corn yield in this environment where we're at in the valley here close to Grand Forks is around 150. Some are 120, some are 150, some might be more. But that equates to about 166,000 acres. And I talked to a gentleman who was on the National RMA board, and that's Risk Management Authority in Washington, D.C. He's a North Dakotan. He was also a president of the Corn Growers Association. So I asked Mr. Clemens, I said, what do you think about the plant we talked this weekend? He said, I'll tell you what, I have traveled the country, and every place I have been where there has been a corn facility, it improves the community, and it's good for the community, and they like it, and it's also good for the farmers. It brings revenue to your community, and it brings jobs. And he was very, very positive about it. He'd like to have been here today, but he couldn't because of the commitments that he had. So when I look at the plant coming here and things that can happen with that, I did have a chance to meet Mr. Lee, and we took a little farm tour. Didn't go to our farm because we're done with corn, but we went out to Larimore to Hoverson's, and he got a chance right in the combine, which he thoroughly enjoyed. And then we went to Columbia Grain to a visit with the guys at Columbia Grain to talk about in our villa about handling corn. And Mr. Lee told the group and told the man that was there was Kurt Harmon. He's the senior vice president of merchandising for Portland, Oregon. I got his card here that day for the day that we were there. And Mr. Lee asked, would you support our facility? He said, absolutely will. He said, and he did say that what we'd like to do is, I need support from the whole community, from all elevators. Now, some people say, well, he didn't come to our facility. It's a matter of time that they had in that one afternoon to do visits. But they did commit, he did commit, that they do need support from our local elevators because they can't take in all that product at one time. So I encourage you and I ask you to go forward with the development agreement because we need it. I mean, we got to take a serious look about this. So I thank you for your time. If there's a question, I'd surely take it, or a comment. But I want to support our farmers. I want to support our community. I think it's important to our healthy environment going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spruill. Any questions for Mr. Spruill? Thank you so much for coming forward today.
Thank you.
It's important for the farmers to have a voice. Mr. Lund.
Thank you, Mr. Spruill. One more guest. I want to introduce Mr. Jared Hagert. So in addition to serving in District 20 in the North Dakota House of Representatives, Mr. Hagert is a fourth-generation farmer in the Amaretto area. He owns and operates a seed conditioning and sales business, Integrated Ag Services. He's past chair of the United Soybean Board, a group that invests $80 million a year in programs that promote U.S. soybeans and soybean products. As I mentioned, he's currently a member of the North Dakota House. He serves on the Industry and Business and Labor Committee, as well as the Transportation Committee, and he's generously offered to share his thoughts of a producer and an agribusiness owner about this about this exciting project.
Mr. Hagert, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me, Council President Sandy, council members. Well, at the risk of being redundant with Mr. Sproul's comments, when I first heard of this project and had the time to stop and think about it, I identified this project as a win overall. A win for 5 areas: the producer, the region's elevators, the community, the region, and the state. Now, it was touched on earlier, we've got a strong history in Grand Forks and North Dakota in value-added ag with the state mill and elevator. And North Dakota deals in commodities, in energy and ag. I mean, that's basically where our revenues come from. So anytime that we can have a facility of this magnitude come into our region as a producer, it's a tremendous benefit to us because it gives us another market to go to. I can haul to my local elevator and they can do business with Fufang, or I can haul direct. It's no different than the state mill and elevator. So that kind of covers the first two of the producer and the region's elevators. You know, the community benefits because you have a higher demand or more jobs to offer. I just heard this statistic today, and I think it's correct, but we're coming up on the anniversary of the 25th anniversary of the flood of '97. And we, if I understood correctly, Grand Forks Public Schools are finally at the level of students they were back then. So it's taken us a long time in the community and the region to get there. And we've done a heck of a job to get there. Bringing in additional 200 jobs really accelerates that growth and helps pump up the community that way. Our region, although strong in value-added ag ventures such as American Crystal, North Dakota State Mill and Elevator, is devoid of opportunities in corn. We have a facility in Castleton that turns corn into ethanol, and we used to have one in Walhalla. Although not big, every little bit helps. And any time with soybeans or corn that you can fractionate your commodity, our base commodity, our corn, our soybeans, our wheat, into different value-added products, we all win. From the state perspective, I was really excited to hear about this project, see it start being reviewed. The plant itself would be a tremendous benefit in bridging eastern North Dakota and western North Dakota with the installation of the Tioga to Grand Forks natural gas pipeline. The legislature did approve the expansion from Viking to the site to help until the completion of the other pipeline. But by bringing that natural gas across the state to an end user that is rather large is a huge benefit to our industry, oil industry extraction in the West, and also picks up the added benefits of creating redundancy of our natural gas within the state, and also can feed natural gas deficit areas in between us. So, you know, I know there are concerns about the project. I feel comfortable with the vetting process that you are going to undertake as you move forward with the development agreement, and I'd encourage you to approve moving into that. But Because bottom line is we are an ag community, ag region, ag state. And when the agriculture sector wins, everyone wins. So thank you for your time tonight, and I'd answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hagert. Any comments or questions? Thank you again for being here. Mr. Lund?
President Sandy, I'll try to wrap things up. No more speakers, out of respect for time. I just wanted to highlight the North Dakota Corn Growers Association, North Dakota Corn Council issued a press release November 9th, really was immediately after the public announcement of this project. Looking for the number here because I didn't write it down. Represent 13,000 corn growers in the state of North Dakota since 1987. We've highlighted a passage or a sentence in there, and I want to read it to you. Before I do that, I want to recognize Greg Amundsen from the North Dakota Corn Growers Association. He's here tonight in support of the project, and they're excited about the opportunity this brings. The highlighted section, I think, which underscores Representative Hagert or Mr. Spruill. Going forward, we will have a much-needed direct-to-end-user option that has been lacking in recent years in the Northern Valley. Information you've seen before, so I'm going to go quick. Economic regional benefits, this is where you spend most of my time as an economic developer. I want to be clear that the only number that we've received from the company is 233. The rest have been extrapolated through economic multiplier type of programs. 233 direct jobs at the plant. The average salary of the jobs that they'll create based on what they've told us is $59,000, just a little over that. We believe that that's going to support another 500 jobs in our community. Indirect and indirect are jobs that exist specifically because the plant is there. Think transportation, think trades that are there, or direct contractors that are working at the plant. We estimate, based on what we believe those jobs are, at $63,000 a year. School district impact on a positive side. Representative Hagert underscored we didn't coordinate, by the way, it's quite nice. We believe through those multiplier analysis that there'll be over 50 children that will be supported in the Grand Forks Public School System as a result, for over $500,000 of additional revenue to the school system too. And we look at the long term, but we certainly can't dismiss the construction jobs that will be supported during the construction of the facility, 2.5 years, at over 1,000 jobs. And we think that salary is going to be a little over $72,000 per year. I want to underscore a couple of things before moving from this slide. There's been discussion, we mentioned it earlier, about the ability to attract jobs in Grand Forks. There's a community not far from us who are on a path to or have completed recruitment of 1,000 jobs at $15 an hour. If that community can do that for $15,000, I believe that our community can attract and retain people to work jobs at twice that salary. So confident in this region to do that. You've seen these numbers. What has been discussed and negotiated that you'll hold a public hearing, we believe, is a payment in lieu of tax that replicates an exemption of 90% over years 1 through 10 and 75% in years 11 through 20. You see what the revenue to all tasking entities will be within years 1 through 10, 11 through 20, and over $5.8 million once the exemption has been exhausted. Makes a lot of assumption, and Mr. Hodak was up here to tell you that assumes the mill rate stays the same, the proportion of property tax stays the same. We didn't want to speculate where that was going to go. We just used the numbers for today, and that's the best we have. You've also seen that. I'm not sure if Mr. Phelan's going to show this to you, but this is how it breaks down in each of those different coordinates or years for each particular tasking entity, focusing on you because that's what we do here. Years 1 through 10, $278,000 of tax revenue. Year 11 through 20, $522, and 1.7 new tax revenue to the city of Grand Forks when the exemption is expired. Before I move on, I missed a statement I want to add to it now. I want to make the point, I guess, based on all that we've heard today and the economic benefits that we just described, that this project, as I mentioned, there are 40 communities that responded to this and 25 that were viable. And we were one of 4 when we had the first site visit. I want to say that communities and states aggressively pursued this project. They recognized the benefits to their economy, state and local. They recognized the benefit to the agricultural communities. States that had them wanted more. Communities that had one wanted another one. So I feel very fortunate that we were able to put our best foot forward to negotiate and to demonstrate how this region and this community, this state could serve the project. So really, just in summary, From the Economic Development Corporation standpoint, we believe this is a strategic business development investment based on city, county, and state priorities and goals. This benefits the regional economy and benefits the regional agricultural community. We think this is an overall investment in the community. We believe it's a strategic investment of ARPA infrastructure dollars, state water infrastructure cost share dollars that are going to benefit the community well beyond the project. State natural gas, this cost share, the same. And really the investment in infrastructure is not only going to support the attraction of this project that's going to create the economic benefits that we talked about to the overall economy, the benefits of the A community, but it's going to support growth beyond this project because the infrastructure will be in place. And I've said infrastructure or investment goes to where infrastructure is. So that's going to create a lot of opportunity, additional gas and infrastructure, water infrastructure and the like to be able to really leverage that for more growth in the community. And so this is my last slide. Sorry it's taking a little while. My request to the Grand Forks City Council on Monday night is to approve the development agreement and move this project to the next stage of due diligence. Happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your time, Mr. Sandy, President Council
Mr. Lund,
Sandy.
for those 72 slides, any questions for Mr. Lund? Anyone? None. Very good. Mr. Phelan, are we going to turn it over to Mr. Gosted to go through the development agreement?
We are. Mr. Goss is going to start, and I'm going to try to close. And I also want to recognize we have Fufang representatives again with us. They are certainly willing to answer any of your questions that you may have this evening, also to kind of cap us out this evening. So I'm going to have Dan start with what the development agreement is and is not, and then I'm going to go through some of the particulars that are contained within that development agreement, really to encourage you to move forward and approve this development agreement so we can start doing some additional work and due diligence.
Before we move forward, Ms. Mock, comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that as I'm looking at the development agreement and some of the subsequent, that's the word I'm looking for, task orders that will come from it, I wanted to acknowledge that I may have a conflict of interest and bring it forward, particularly because we do have a lot of people watching this issue, and I think I just want to be straightforward and forthcoming, and in working for a company that will sign some of those task orders and agreements, I want to bring that forward. I will of course request to be recused from all of those task orders and agreements, but I wanted to bring it forward before discussing the development agreement in case the council has concerns, and I would like the council to weigh those concerns and help decide if I should vote on the development agreement, just to be as forthcoming as I can be.
Thank you, Ms. Mock. Is there any, Mr. Gosted? Yes, sir.
I can address the conflict issue. And I think I've done this before, is that the way the state law is the non-conflicted members.
We can't hear back here. We couldn't hear Ms. Mock. We can't hear Mr. Gosted.
Okay. The way that state law sets up is that if there is a conflict because of a potential pecuniary interest that a governing body member may receive as a result of something before them, that the non-conflicted members of that governing body can approve that conflicted governing body member's right to vote. And so it's a positive motion. It would be a motion to permit Ms. Mock to participate in the vote, notwithstanding that particular conflict because of her employment with A2S and the fact that A2S is on the task orders and would be asked to perform and has been asked to perform certain tasks going forward with this particular matter. At this juncture, I think it's at the point in time when those particular task orders are up for a vote that you'd probably want to have a motion by the non-conflicted members. For example, Mr. Weber or Mr. Weigel are the non-conflicted members. They could move to permit Ms. Mock to participate in the vote. If that motion is passed, then she's allowed to participate. If that motion fails, then she would not be allowed to participate in the vote on those particular matters.
Mr. Gosted, what if there is no motion? She's identified that she's conflicted, yet there's no motion. If there is no approval, then what?
Then she's deemed to actually have voted in the majority, because you cannot abstain from a vote. If you do abstain, you're deemed to have voted in the majority.
So do you believe that she needs to be recused for the development agreement or the subsequent agreements?
It's, and I probably misspoke, it's probably a safer route for all of the agreements, the development agreements and the task orders, just out of an abundance of caution in this particular process.
Any comments, Mr. Weber?
I think that you've given us this speech many times, and we have almost always ignored your advice to us and gone the wrong way. So I respect Vice President Mock's integrity on this issue, and I believe I understand why she has asked for this to come forward. However, I have a great deal of respect for her technical knowledge and her integrity on these matters, and I would greatly value her input throughout the discussion, and I would value her vote on these decision points. And so I believe I'm making the right motion. I would move that we recognize that she's conflicted, but that we want her to be included in the discussion and the vote. That would be a positive motion.
Correct.
Have I? Correct. That's my motion then.
Ms. Dockler?
So I understand your motion is that you are making a motion to allow Vice President Mock to vote on the agreements, all of the agreements, despite the fact that she believes she has a conflict, correct?
She has brought forward her observation of potential conflict. I do not believe that that will affect her questioning or her votes, and so the intention of my motion is that she be included in all the discussions and the votes, yes.
Can she not continue, be a part of the discussion regardless of whether or not we recuse her from voting?
I think she could probably make comment, but it would probably cast a cloud over those comments. Really, what the governing body would be doing with Mr. Weber's motion would be waiving her conflict, understanding a conflict exists, but waiving the conflict to allow her to fully participate, not only just in discussion points, but on the ultimate vote.
When you say,
Ms. Dockler?
when you say a cloud, for lack of a better term, it's been a long night. Would that be worse than her voting, having to vote, even if she abstained and being counted in the majority? Would that cloud be worse than her then being accused of conflict of interest or of receiving monies? I have to confess, I don't completely understand Vice President Mock's job. That is not my wheelhouse. However, with that in mind, if she can't completely say she's not going to financially benefit from these contracts, would that not be some of the issues that some individuals within the crowd tonight have brought up as an issue?
I'm not
For
following your
benefit,
question.
personal benefit from bringing Fufang here? I'm not saying that's necessary, that
think
anyone
it's-
here has done that, but hasn't that been an accusation from the public?
I don't
That we should
believe
be
it's,
aware of?
in Councilmember Dockler, I don't believe it's that direct of a conflict of interest. I think it's the fact that she works at A2S, and there may be an indirect benefit. I don't believe she's actually working on any of the task orders, as I understand it, but there may be an indirect financial benefit because of A2S's involvement. And I think out of an abundance of caution, it does make sense for Ms. Mock to have raised this issue for the council, for them to be aware of the potential conflict, and for the council, the non-conflicted members, to make a decision as to whether she should participate in the voting on these matters.
Mr. Veen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think I do. No, I know I do. For me, I probably disagree with you a little bit, Dan, on this. I think the task orders by which their AE2S is being paid is a conflict. I disagree. I think that the development agreement is a different case because it's based on the data The development agreement isn't tied to AE2S, where the task orders are.
And Councilmember Veen, I understand it just seemed that the development agreement, as we'll talk about, precipitates the various conditions and those task orders to review those. And that's why I was contemplating the development agreement as an abundance of caution type of vote.
The task orders, obviously, just like all contracts we have, I mean, that's very, very consistent. That is data that is generated. Once the task order is done, the data is available to be used as a part of the development agreement. That's where I clearly see a difference between the two, and I just needed to state that.
Can I ask a question? Ms. Mock, AE2S is an ESOP, is it not? So it is employee-owned, correct? So no matter what, if they get any contracts, it will directly affect your pay.
I can't say that it won't.
Right.
Which is-
I would disagree with Mr. Weber. You are definitely conflicted, and you should not vote on these issues, in my opinion. But,
I
please.
just wanted to, I did speak to Mr. Gosted about this just briefly, and I believe the way he would like the motion raised is how Mr. Weber raised it. I just want to clarify, I have questions. I'm more than willing to provide those questions for discussion purposes. I understand, whoever's chairing the meeting could choose not to recognize me if I am recused from the vote. That would be their choice. I certainly have questions. So, I mean, I'm more than willing to participate in the discussion. I only wanted to bring it forward knowing that there are emotions on both sides, and I didn't want to risk having a decision recalled because I didn't bring it forward for ethical reasons. And I think the way Mr. Gosted wanted it brought forward was how Mr. Weber proposed. And then if you think I have a conflict of interest and should not vote, you would vote no on that motion. And if that prevails, I wouldn't vote on the matters. And like I said, I'm more than willing to participate in the discussion and provide comment, probably more than people would like, so.
Other comments?
Yeah, that's been a lot of
Mr. Weber?
discussion since the motion. Normally, we look for a second, or it dies for lack of a second.
Yeah, my
before we have a
apologies. I
discussion.
guess I thought,
It,
Doctor raised her hand, she went on with the question, she didn't second. Yes, very good. There is a motion, is there a second? Second by Kavami.
Thanks.
Okay, any other comments? Yes, Mr. Veen?
It's been a while since the motion. What is the motion?
The motion is to allow Ms. Mock to participate and vote on all agreements.
On all agreements.
Yes, sir.
On the agreements, including the task orders.
That's correct. Could we do a roll call vote? Yes, Mr. Veen, certainly.
Is it possible to split the motion?
We could have a second motion, depending upon how this goes.
I tell you what, because we're just considering the development agreement tonight, how about if I just limit my motion to the development agreement at this time?
Council President Sandy, the motion is two parts. One part is for the development agreement and the accessory agreements. That's one motion we're asking for this evening to move forward.
Okay.
The second is we have a series of 6 task orders to also move forward, some of which have AE2S as the consultant, some do not.
So my motion at this point will just be for the development agreement.
Is that a friendly amendment? Second, Mr. Kavami, great. Okay. Yes, please.
All right. Weigel?
No.
Dockler?
No.
Weber?
Yes.
Fahmy?
No.
Bean?
Yes.
And Sandy?
No.
We have 4 noes, 2 yeses.
Great. Is there a second motion related to this topic? Mr. Veen?
Yeah,
Yes,
that
sir.
would be, she'd be excused from voting on the task orders, right? It would be, we would see a conflict of interest on the task
I
order.
think how Mr. Gosted wants it is he wants you, even though you disagree, he wants you to move to allow her to
Okay.
so that we can vote it down. So is that your motion, to allow her to in the,
Oh, so we can vote it down.
so we can vote it down?
Sure. I will vote.
Okay,
I'll make that
is
motion.
there a second? Mr. Weigel, great. All
right.
those in favor of allowing Ms. Mock to vote on the task orders signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion fails. Mr. Weber agrees. Okay. No, Mr. Gossett.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you've got in front of you the first slide, a development agreement. Before I get too far into that, I want to thank a number of people within the city that assisted in creating the development agreement. Todd Phelan, Al Grasser, Brandon Baseflug, Melanie Parvey, Paul Hudek, Brian Brooks, Lisa Botnan, Sean Gaddy. They all assisted me in providing their expertise in issues that each of them had in the development going forward and became embedded within the agreement itself. The second point I want to make is, as I understand as late as today, that I am not expecting, you've got in front of you the development agreement. It's the same development agreement that you had last week, with the exception that I removed all the red line changes and the embedded comments. They were all accepted within this document. And as I understand, as late as today, Fufeng, I'm not expecting any material substantive changes from the development agreement that you've got before you. What the development agreement does, and I viewed it as really setting up the three pillars that are shown there: financial security provided to the city, governmental approvals secured before proceeding with the development, and the remedies for change and flexibility provided to the city. So if there is a change in some assumptions made as far as an infrastructure or the plant, that it allowed flexibility for the city to also make changes and then incorporate those changes in rates or costs or fees or assessments that may be made for the development for the infrastructure. So what the development agreement does is really kind of puts the brakes on things. Because what it does is it allows the city to confirm, to test, and to verify that Fufeng has met all the governmental requirements. That's a defined term, it's very broad. Any local, state, or federal governmental entity that has jurisdiction over either Fufeng, the development, the city, or the infrastructure, that they've obtained permits. The city is verifying and assuring that is done. That the plant meets all standards, engineering standards, land development standards. It also allows the city to determine that the risks that have been identified by the experts that the city has employed are being mitigated against. What the development agreement does then with respect to Fufeng is they need to demonstrate that they've acquired all of those governmental requirements, that they've acquired all of those permits that are necessary for their construction, that they have in fact met engineering standards and development plans, and that they've provided that financial security throughout from the start of the development agreement till substantial completion. If we go to the next slide. What the development agreement has is in excess of 20 conditions that have to be satisfied before construction of the city infrastructure is to begin. And this is not an exhaustive list that you've got in front of you. But for example, the plant development plan review and approvals, that's to assure that their plans meet engineering standards, that they meet the governmental requirements. The acceptable remedies for change in development approach and assumptions. Again, if there's a change in the assumption that was used to date to determine what needed to be built or what infrastructure was needed, it provides that flexibility to the city to make those changes. One of the conditions that wasn't listed on here that I want to point out, it's one that provides that if the city does not make a determination that the construction of the infrastructure is either inadvisable or impracticable because there's been a change in the assumptions. There's been some material change in the plant plans or in the infrastructure, or there's been a material change in one of the governmental requirements. The city has that condition in their favor. What the conditions mean is it's the method to confirm and test and verify that Fufeng has acquired and complied with the governmental requirements, acquired and complied with the permits, has met those engineering standards and land development requirements, and that the risks that our experts have identified are being mitigated against. What the development agreement also does is it provides that financial security. There's a $5 million letter of credit to cover the upfront costs should any of the conditions are not satisfied, or if there's a default by Fufeng under the terms of the agreement. There's also now a new development, as I've talked about before, 2 escrow accounts that will be open, one for the raw water infrastructure, one for the wastewater infrastructure. The primary benefit costs to that are at $9.2 million, and the plus, and we'll talk about the escrow agreement in a minute, for additional deposits that are contemplated under the escrow agreement. So what that financial security does is it provides that security to the city while it is testing and verifying the things that need to be verified, those conditions that are being satisfied, and throughout the term of the construction. What does the development also do is if any of the 20 conditions are not satisfied, or if there's a default by Fufeng under the terms of the development agreement, the city has the right then to terminate all of the agreements, the pilot, the development agreement, all of the agreements it has with Fufeng. It has the right then to recover its development costs through that letter of credit. Also not listed on here is that if those costs happen to exceed that $5 million, the development agreement provides that Fufeng is responsible for that excess amount over and above the $5 million. Although I don't, from the numbers that I've seen, I don't anticipate that to be the case, but we've got that in the development agreement as well. And it also provides that for that unspent money in the cash sitting in the bank that's in those escrow accounts, if we've started on any part of the raw water infrastructure or the wastewater infrastructure, the city retains that money so that it can complete those tasks. What the development agreement does not do is it doesn't obligate the city to construct the infrastructure. There is some pre-development staging type of construction that may occur, but those costs are then covered by that letter of credit in the event there is a termination or an event of default. It does not grant Fufeng any permits to construct. Again, there is an exception with respect to that pre-development staging type of early development work that will be done in 2022. That's all at risk for Fufeng. It is not, and in fact, there's a particular provision, it's 3.2.9H, that says this agreement is not a review or approval of any plans. It is not a permit to construct. They still have to go through that exercise. I'll just briefly talk about the escrow agreement. And that's items 2.6C in the agenda. And I'll go through it real quick. It was just sent to Fufeng last week. I do expect that they'll have comments on it. I think one of the comments that I'm hearing is that the way I've set this up is that escrow account is going to be an account owned by the city. I think they would prefer a third-party escrow agent to hold the money. That's not necessarily unusual. I've seen escrow agreements where the two parties each have an interest in the cash, and a third party manages the money and makes distributions. That'll be something we'll have to work through with respect to Fufang and whether that's acceptable or not. But that's one of the changes. Also, I noticed as I was going through it, there's a page 5 that's blank. That's a page break error when I was converting the documents. It's not a blank page, it's just a conversion error. The document that you have is only for the raw water agreement. The reason I didn't do a wastewater is because they're going to pair and mirror each other. So I wanted to work through the issues with the raw water agreement first with Fufang, and then basically incorporate all those changes within the wastewater agreement as well. There is an initial deposit. Right now, that's estimated at, for the raw water, to $4.3 million, give or take. For the wastewater, it's $4.8 million. When that initial deposit will be is under the terms of the escrow agreement is on the effective date. I would expect that effective date to be shortly after the date of the development agreement. There are additional deposits that are going to be required or reviewed, I should say. That will be determined, the review time will be when what's described as the general contract award date. That's the date that the city awards, either the later of the date the city awards the general contract for the construction of these particular items, or the date the construction engineer contract is awarded. I would expect that the later date will be the date the general contract is awarded. The reason we do that is because that's a date where we have an idea as to what the contract price is. Because what I do is I take 1.1 times what the raw water infrastructure obligation is at that time. And we determine that raw water obligation by looking at what the contract price is for the general contractor, what the contract price is for the construction engineering. We'll have a very good idea as what the costs of the design engineer are going to be, and we'll have a good idea as to what other costs like land acquisition costs and legal fees will be. And we'll also have an idea as to what the deduct is for those, in this case, raw water, the State Water Commission numbers. And so what I do is I take a look at what that obligation is, multiply it times 1.1, and compare it to what's in the escrow account on that particular day. If that interim obligation times 1.1 is greater than what's in the escrow account, they have to make another deposit under the terms of the escrow agreement. If that 1.1 times that infrastructure obligation is less than what's in the escrow account, there's no further deposit that needs to be made. There's an example that's attached to the escrow agreement setting forth a illustration of what would happen. So there's that additional deposit. There is also provisions for distributions that can be found in section 2.3. And what we do is we take distributions based upon the developer's proportion of these costs. Bear in mind that, for example, the wastewater treatment facility, not all of it is a primary benefit to Fufang. So I take what's called a developer's proportion, which is based upon the cost of the primary benefit divided by the total cost for the construction. Whatever that percentage is, that's their percentage that'll be paid for each invoice that comes in. Because my concern is the contractor's not going to differentiate between primary benefit cost for Fufang and the remaining costs. They're just going to send you a bill for whatever work they've done, and we've delineated out now a method to come up with a percentage of each of those invoices that would come through. For the design costs, that'll be the amount that the city council approves. So once the council approves those design costs from the design engineer, we'll just do the math and multiply times that developer's proportion, and we'll withdraw that money out of the escrow account to cover those costs. For construction costs, because there'll be progress payment requirements, under most construction contracts, the construction engineer reviews and makes recommendation to the city to make payment. So we will use that method to determine how much the how much to withdraw from the escrow account based upon the recommendation from the city engineer. For construction engineering costs, again, it's just back to you get an invoice, and if the city council approves that invoice, we'll apply that developer's portion to that invoice and withdraw that money out of the escrow account. There is also a provision in section 2.4, at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, all claims either have been brought, the claim statute of limitations period for bringing a claim has expired, or if a claim has been brought, we either have a final judgment, a non-appealable final judgment, or we have a resolution of all claims. We're then going to look and see how much has been deposited and how much was actually the primary benefit cost. If the primary benefit cost exceeds all of the deposits that have been made, Fufang has to pick up that differential. If the escrow account still has money in the bank, then Fufang would get that remaining balance. There are accounting and tax reporting provisions in section 2.5 and 2.6. Section 3 is something I wanted to make clear. Because Fufang is paying for these costs, I also wanted to make clear that it's the city that controls the plans and the construction oversight for these infrastructure components, and that the city owns those improvements and plans after everything is said and done. There are also default and remedy provisions. Again, if there's a default under the escrow agreement, we can terminate the escrow agreement and all other agreements. We can pursue the remedies under the other agreements that we have with Fufang. And again, if construction is started on the raw water or the wastewater, we retain that money to complete that project. That ends my presentation. I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gosted. Any questions for Mr. Gosted? Hearing none. Mr. Weber?
If I may, I actually have a question for Mr. Lund, if I may. Mr. Lund, we heard this evening in your presentation the number of state departments that were involved in promoting this project from the very beginning. We've heard that local major employers have indicated that we have the ability to attract workers here. We heard about the first, second, and third visits, all of which seem like reasons to celebrate our community's ability to attract a development like this. We have brought in outside money. This project promises to bring in outside money to help our local economy grow, including upward pressure on wages and benefits. We've heard from local authorities at the state and also from local growers that this is going to be a fantastic positive benefit for our community. My question for you is, what would you anticipate the impact to be if the council does not approve this agreement or otherwise stalls this project from moving forward?
President, Council Sandy, councilman members, members of the committee, my mind, I guess, goes to three or four things. I think I'll start with, I think they're all reputational in nature. Is the community willing, and does the community want to grow? I'm a little bit concerned. So there's a North American site selector that worked with the project, and we're at this point, and we've gone through a lot to get here. Would that site selector have any interest at all in working with us in the future if we are at the finish line and we said, no, we're not interested in moving forward any longer? Just one thought. I think a very similar thought for the North Dakota Department of Commerce. I mentioned that they really advocated for the community, the ability that they thought that we had to serve it. The project, in terms of expanding the geography and allowing us to, participate in the process. I wonder how really hard they'd go to bat for us the next time. I think about, the impact, agricultural community. We're at the doors, we're at the finish line, goal line, front door of creating some real opportunity for them. And we talk a lot about it, the Grand Forks Region EDC, and I think this council has demonstrated its willingness to, be a broader organization through the Growth Fund, through the Jobs Development Authority, through the City Council, to walk away from the benefits that you've heard from the agricultural community this evening. I guess I'm not sure, I can't speak directly to it, but I'd be concerned about, are we serious about benefiting the ag community if we have something this valuable in front of us right now, and if we walk away from it? These things, it's a high-profile project. People are watching. I'm just concerned about, will people look at the community, will look at the Economic Development Corporation and say, are you really interested in outside investment? Are you really interested in growing?
Thank you, Mr. Lund. As part of our responsibility as a regional center in the midst of an ag economy is absolutely to look for opportunities like this. Nonetheless, we have a very serious responsibility to do our due diligence to make sure that all of the pressing issues are being properly investigated and vetted. But it's my sense at this point that the development agreement does exactly that for us. And so with that, I will move approval of the development agreement.
Mr. Phelan, are you looking for one motion or multiple motions tonight?
I would ask to move the development agreement along with those associated agreements that are attached to the development agreement. There are also 6 task orders that you can move at the same time. Those 6 task orders are really going to work on all the permitting, the engineering studies that we have to do, really leading into those 6 task orders that we've attached. So I'm good with just approving this staff recommendation as attached to the staff report under one motion.
Mr. Weber, would you consider that, or do you want to take them individually? We can certainly have discussion after the motion if you want to discuss the individual task orders or the agreements.
Council President Sandy, can I just interject one thing?
Certainly.
If the motion would be subject to attorney review and approval of the development agreement and the escrow agreement, because there's still some discussion that still needs to be made. But again, I'm not expecting significant material changes in the development agreement. And there may be some items that in the escrow agreement that we may need to modify slightly as well. So just to make it clear that it's subject to that approval.
But you're needing some nod of approval from us this evening to move forward with this work.
Correct.
Right?
It would be an approval to get it to the city council at next Monday's meeting.
In fact, it's basically my understanding that we can either continue to move forward with the review of this agreement and its pursuit, or we just stop the whole thing right now. Am I reading that incorrectly?
No, I think you're reading it absolutely correct. I just want to recognize that there may be a few small changes that need to be made in the agreement that I need to review.
And we're just making a recommendation as committee of the whole tonight anyway. This would go to council next week for a full vote. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
This is preliminary approval.
Right.
Certainly,
Right.
right? Which I think with that always comes subject to the city attorney's review.
Very good.
Right? So is that your motion?
My motion would still be just to do the vote on the development agreement at this point.
Is there a second? Weigel seconds. Okay. Mr. Veen, comment?
Yeah, I do have a few follow-up questions. I think the reason why I didn't second the motion for the development agreement is I think we need to get the task orders done. I think one of the principal things I want to see done as a part of the development is to make sure some of those more detailed concerns or questions are addressed, because I think we need to know some of that data to make sure that the development agreement is as complete as possible, okay? And we don't know all the information yet. The task orders, I appreciate, are the ones that will help get us there. And you, Todd, you and the mayor, you know, we talked back in January when we put together a list of all the questions we have, that I had, I'm sure others have too. And with that, I think you helped identify some of these task orders. And the discussion that I've had since then, some of it earlier today and then what's been presented today was very helpful in trying to understand some of that detail. But we still don't know all of it until we've done the task orders. So the dilemma that I see is some of those task orders are going to take a long time. And we need to get some level of the development agreement going. So how do you balance that? In the perfect world, I'd want to know all the information before I approve the development agreement. What I'm hearing from Mr. Gosted is there's still ways out, even if you don't have it all now, because I still would like to learn more. I'm not done learning about this as we go. There's a lot of data here. It's been pretty well summarized until you get into the details. Because I do have a couple of questions just on the development agreement itself. I didn't probably delve into the task orders as much, but I know that they're covering a few of the areas that I still think could be and probably should be addressed somewhere. And I'm going to assume if we approve this now and it goes to council whatever next Tuesday, that's the amount of time we've got to try to get some of these items addressed, right? If that's the final approval.
Yep. Council President Sand and Council Member Vane, I think with the development, we think within the development agreement, we've captured all the areas of study and permitting that we need to capture. However, as Mr. Gosta has said, there has flexibility because we're going to discover things as we study things, and then we will adapt and bring those back to you. And so the agreement is not, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. We're going to be studying these various areas. We think we've captured all the areas that we need to study. Those task orders, those early task orders really are going to move us forward. But as we learn things, the agreement's meant to be flexible and to continue to come back and adapt as we need to.
Well, and that's why I'd like to follow up with a few of the questions. Last time, I think I talked a little bit about the risk assessments. And I think you've labeled some of them, but the risk assessment I'm looking for is much more detailed than that. I mean, I think that was pretty basic, and I'd love to see a more detailed risk assessment done. And the reason why I'd like to know the risks is if there are certain risks that we didn't find, we might identify in the agreement and be able to add to the ones, because I think what we've done so far is, and much of what Mr. Gosted has done is manage risk. I think that's probably a big piece of how we do it. And risk, you know what, risk usually means cost. I mean, when you end up talking about every risk has a price to it. So I would still like to see us continue to look at some of the risk assessments to see if there are things that we might have missed that probably could be included in here too. And Mr. Gosted, many times you said the city can do this or the city. Can you define the city?
Well, let's see, it's going to be through the consultants that the city has hired, Black and Veatch, AE2S. It's going to be their recommendations, their review of matters. It's going to be city engineering department. It's going to be Mr. Phelan. It'll be me. It'll be the city council. All of it, when issues come up, will be presented to review these matters.
But who has the final authority? When you say, is it the city? Is it, do administration to make? You said the city has those 24 outs or whatever it is.
If there is a condition that's not satisfied, I'm confident I'd bring it to the city council to determine what remedy you want to pursue, whether you want to terminate the agreement or whether you want to pursue a default.
That's what I was wondering. When you say, is it the city council? Is the judge on that type of thing? What's the definition when it really is?
Yes, it is. You would ultimately have to give me direction to pursue termination of the development agreement or pursue a default or pursue remedies like any other litigation type of matter. I wouldn't say litigation, but any type of action where you're pursuing some remedy against another party, that's the city council's purview.
Okay, that's what, just so we were clear, because I didn't know if that was defined in here. And the other thing that I was looking at, they talk about being materially significant. If something is an issue, it needs to be materially significant. Is that what you wrote in the development agreement?
That was in the one condition. Let me see if I can pull it out there.
Mr. Veen, do you know which paragraph it is?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Don't remember.
I think it's page 32.
I define it, it's not a legal definition, but as a city administrator, when something's materially different, we bring that back to you. Something has changed, and those are judgment calls. It's hard to define what that is, but you know it when you see it, as they say. And so I think those are things where we thought we were going to serve something this way. Say, for instance, the raw water. You know, we were going to put 2 pumps in at the intake. We're going to build a pump station at the water treatment plant, and then we're going to run 2 dual lines to Fufang in the greater area. If we come back and say, you know what, that's a $17 million project. It turns out, you know, we need X more pumps, and we're not going to be able to serve it with those 2 dual lines. Instead of being 17 million, I think Mr. Goss has got in there 150% over the cost estimate. We got to bring it back. But if something like that turns out different than what we thought, we bring that back to you to say that's really materially changed from what we first described in all the exhibits that we have in front of you.
I'm referring to section 8.1.8. It's on page 31 of the development agreement. It says this is a condition now. So there's been no determination by the city, acting in good faith, that construction of the infrastructure has become inadvisable or impracticable due to a change in the law, a change in the assumptions, the institution or threat by any person or any governmental authority of litigation, proceedings, or other legal or equitable action against the developer or the city, any material adverse change in the construction of the plant or city infrastructure and or the operations of the developer, the plant, or the city, or a material adverse change in any governmental requirement applicable to the developer, the Grand Forks plant, the city, and the city infrastructure. So if that type of an event comes up, we'll bring it to the city council, and you'll have to make a determination as to whether you want to make the determination that it's no longer advisable or impractical or practicable to construct the infrastructure. You'll have to wait to see that type of an event. It would be really hard to try to define the term material without seeing what the circumstances are.
And I would say to Mr. Veen too, Mr. Gosted, is that you're going to approve, when we get to design of these facilities, you're going to approve the design agreement. You're going to approve the bids that we move forward with. And so you're going to, within all these pieces of infrastructure, just like we do every Monday night, like tonight, you're going to review all that again, and we're going to say, hey, we said this on Monday of February 14th, and when these design agreements come back or the bids come back, you're going to see these things multiple times, as long as things continue to move forward in a positive way. It's like when Mr. Grasser sometimes brings projects to you 6 times on these transportation projects, and by the 6th time, we're actually going to move forward with the project. You're going to see the same thing in this way. It's just going to be a more condensed time frame.
Mr. Veen?
Yeah, and the last one, I think major question is on section 8. I know we do list in there that we will have a chart of city infrastructure and waived conditions. Is that forthcoming?
We're waiting for Fufang to get that information to us, but that was the pre-development and staging type of work that I talked about earlier. And those, we're waiting for that from Fufang. And again, those costs would ultimately have to be approved by the city council and would the letter of credit is intended to cover those costs in the event that the other conditions aren't satisfied as we move forward and the city council decides to terminate the agreement. That's what the letter of credit is intended to take care of.
So, and that's what I'm getting, and in again, paragraph, section 8, there's subject, it says subject to section 8.3, and I think we've talked about 8.3 before in the past. It's kind of a list of what projects we can start construction on, is that right, before, how do you say that?
It is, the way I'd couch it, Councilmember Bean, is it's that portion of city infrastructure that FUFUN is going to request that the city commence this year in 2022. Really before, we're targeting the air permit, the North Dakota air permit is kind of the triggering event. Before that gets issued, FUFUN is asked that certain infrastructure components, certain pre-development components be started now to match their timing as to when their plant will be fully operational. So we do not have that list yet.
So we will actually start construction before we may have the permits, final permits, like air quality permits.
That's correct. There will be some construction, and that's what the letter of credit is intended to cover, is those costs in the event that the agreement is either terminated or there is a default under the agreement, we'd be able to recover those costs through the letter of credit.
Councilor Dean, other comments? Well, we have a motion and a second on the development agreement. I think we owe it to the public to hear from them prior to voting on the development agreement. Again, this is a committee of the whole meeting, and we don't typically take public comments during a committee of the whole meeting, but we certainly don't want people propagating that we're not interested in listening or that we're not giving people the opportunity to speak. I have 9 comment cards. Some of them seem to be related people who I'm guessing are going to provide similar discussion topics. So I would ask that if you're coming forward and you've already heard someone make the same argument that you're going to make, in the interest of time and all of our sanity, I think it would be great if you would not provide repetitive information. So, I'll give, yes, Mr. Weber?
It's been practice over the years for people to come forward and give their name and their address.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in putting a stopwatch to it, but we've generally kept this to around 3 minutes. So it's your meeting, though. I would ask those to be considered. Thanks.
Certainly. I think if people are providing new and valuable information, we're not going to stop them from speaking. If the information is repetitive, and I'll even take the authority to say, if we've heard it at the last 3 meetings, I might consider cutting people off at 3 minutes. Mr. Coachman.
Hello, council and ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Mock, I want to thank you for asking that one question to the gentleman back here about the vetting, which was very important because when it came down, he said their information.
Excuse me, President Sandy?
Yes.
I've just asked that speakers give their name and their address.
Oh, Michael Coachman, you want a P.O. box, mailing address?
Your address?
405 Barrett Avenue.
405 Barron Avenue. Thank you, sir. Go on.
So with that, I'm going to read some other information. A private, this is from the federal law, 18 USCA 953, again 953, private correspondence with a foreign government, currently any citizen of the United States, whether he may be who without authority of the United States direct or indirect commercial, or carry any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any other office or agent thereof with the intent to influence the measure or conduct of any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof related to any dispute or conversary with the United States or to defeat the measure of the United States shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 3 years or both. This section shall not abridge the rights of a citizen to apply himself or his agent or any foreign government or to the agent thereof for the readiness of any injury which may have sustained from such government or any if the agent or subject. So basically what it's saying is, if you don't have a written correspondence with the U.S. government stating, hey, look, this company is okay, you're going to be a violation of this federal act. Why is that so important? Especially for you. Because when it comes down to it, it is you who are going to wind up going to federal prison. Not anybody else, you because of the decision you make. Now, I talked to a couple people. Some have called the FBI the local branch, and the common theme is almost the same. And some call the district. Me, myself, I called the headquarters of the FBI last Tuesday and was informing them what was going on here. And the guy's typing, and he goes, In a minute later, he goes, let me put you on hold. And comes back and said, this is quite interesting. We don't have much information on this company. So, what does that tell you? That not all the agencies, I guess you probably haven't contacted FBI yet, have you? Yeah, I didn't think so. So anyway, with some of the stuff that you guys mentioned, that you contacted our congressman, so I emailed Kelly Armstrong, Hovind, and Kramer, and said, I have a few questions regarding the Fung Fang group that is planning on being established here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Did you at any time have a security briefing on this company? If you did, what were the major concerns, by what federal agent or agencies, and when? Have you performed a vetting on this company? Have you been contacted with the mayor or Grand Forks within the last few years on security issues or concern with Fung Fang Group? What was the statement and when? Request all emails on this matter from you and the Grand Forks mayor and any federal agencies. Could you provide this information back by 17th February? Well, Kelly Armstrong's office called me today.
Thank you, Mr. Coachman.
Would you like to hear what Kelly Armstrong said?
Actually, no, I'd appreciate if you would forward an email to us. All of our email addresses are listed online.
Oh, okay, I will do that.
Feel free to send it to us. I am interested, and it'd be
all
great
right.
if we could get that in writing from you. Thank you.
By the way, they denied any type thing on that.
I appreciate your concern for our getting thrown in prison. Mr. Perkins.
That's what we're here for, to make sure you don't,
That's
but.
nice. Mr. Perkins?
Before I get into what I was going to say, I would follow up what Mr. Coachman was saying. I too contacted my congressional delegation after the mayor assured us that he had checked with them, and they denied, their spokespeople denied having been asked or responding. And one of them said, we don't do that. That's what other federal agencies do. I think you all know I'm opposed to this project for environmental reasons. And I just wanted to recommend some good reading to you guys. In October this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Control issued another report. And to my surprise, they realized they'd made a big mistake in earlier reports, because the rate of decline of our climate is much faster than they thought it was. And according to this latest report, 1.2 billion climate refugees will be out of their homes by mid-century if we continue as we're doing today. Change needs to be made quickly. 1.2 billion. Do you remember what the population of the world is? That's a substantial number of people. countries such as Kiribati, the Maldives, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, Solomon Islands, they're going to be gone. They're going to be wiped out. Huge impacts. People will be displaced from Singapore, Seychelles, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Dominican Republic, Cuba, the Bahamas, Belize, and the United States. 1 million people will have to leave their homes in the United States. And of course, we're going to have hotter temperatures, more wildfires, more severe storms, increased drought, food shortages, spread of disease, and loss of species. I really recommend you read that report. It's easy to read. You can find it. IPCC report, Google, Bing, you'll be right there. And then one other point, I'll keep it quick. Mr. Lund made some very good points here after being questioned by Mr. Weber. He pointed out that the further we go into this project, the more we can't get out of it without hurting ourselves. Right? We can't back out now because we're going to lose standing with the state, with the feds, with other people. That's why you should not hurry on this project. There are way too many unanswered questions. Why don't you get the answers before you move forward? I think it's a bad project anyway, but the further you go, the harder it is to get out if you ever have to. And why not do things in the right order?
Thank you, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Ms. Perkins? Your name and address for the record,
Yes.
please.
Hi, I'm Betsy Perkins, 5571 Charlie Ray Drive. Individuals, communities, states, and countries around the world are working to cut back on fossil fuel usage in order to mitigate climate change. What are we in Grand Forks doing to help save the planet? Instead of subsidizing this processing plant, I would like Grand Forks to be a leader and set example for other communities by saying no to Fufeng and instead create a climate change mitigation plan for the city of Grand Forks.
Thank you. Lonnie Leak? Name and address for the record, please.
1075 24th Street Northeast, Emerado, North Dakota. Lonnie Leak.
Good evening.
I'm a fourth generation farmer from Emerado, North Dakota. And I'd like to drill down to a little more specific topic. Mr. Gosted's presentation talked about how they would have to have a permit for water and air, and order has been brought up in this council. I would like to know if Mr. Phelan, Mr. Lund, and Fufeng representatives would be specific into the near future about how they're going to regulate sulfate discharges from this plant. It has a large, if I assume they're going to use sulfur dioxide to make sulfate compounds to steep the corn, then they're going to have to be able to get rid of the sulfur somehow through wastewater, through the air, or byproducts. So what technology is available that's cost effective and is technologically feasible to eliminate the sulfur that will go into the environment through the drain to the Red River down outfall or through the air from hydrogen sulfide being trapped under the ice in lagoons. That's why I want to know if they're going to use a lagoon system to mitigate or regulate the sulfur compounds. When you have anaerobic process to eliminate sulfur under the ice in our climate, you're going to have a release of hydrogen sulfide toxic gas, which is regulated by the federal government now, wafting across the northwest wind into Grand Forks and the University of North Dakota. And I have my own opinion that that degrades people's physical and psychological ability to perform to the best of their abilities. Therefore, I would like to know how, compared to like Blair, Nebraska, or Fort Dodge, Iowa, do their lagoons freeze over? So everybody knows it stinks in the spring when the ice breaks up and melts. How bad is this going to be? I'd like to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Todd Lee.
I'm Todd Leak. I live at 2371 10th Avenue Northeast, Emeryville, North Dakota. I farm in Fairfield Township. First thing I'd like to do is comment, my friend and neighbor, Mr. Hagert, comment that he could either haul to a Fufeng plant, should it be built, or to his local elevators. That's fine. I know, I'm glad he's looking at his options, but neither of the elevators are going to be subsidized at $106 million. And I think that I just want to reiterate the level playing field concept that the council should look at prior to going forward with the development agreement. We can do sophomoric investigations by calling people and everybody says it's fine, but I think that you could also have at your disposal NDSU Agricultural Economics do a study on this to see what impact it's going to have on the local elevator economy. Another thing that's also important is to understand that sometimes these things don't work out. Out at Northwood, North Dakota, Northwood Mills is sitting defunct, unused, and vacant. That was a soybean crushing plant. There was economic development involved in that, and it didn't come to fruition, and the city of Northwood was left with a big hefty tab for supplying utilities to that facility that's now not paying any taxes or minimal amount. It's been sold for 10 cents on the dollar to an entity in Nebraska. But past that, I want to get back to the issue of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that I've discussed before with you. I've been in contact with Representative Jim McGovern, the author of the bill in the House, and with his staff. They have been very helpful in understanding it. And basically, it was a bipartisan bill passed overwhelmingly, signed by the President on the 23rd of December of 2021. And it was introduced into Congress about the same time as the Fufeng group made the first overtures to the state. About it, and March 2020 is when this was first introduced into Congress. So April 2020 was when the presentation said that the first contacts were made by Fufeng. And what this, the Uyghur Forced Prevention Labor Act, Elimination Act or Prevention Act, basically what it does is there's a presumption based on the act that if you have a facility in Xinjiang province, it's presumed by the Customs and Border Prevention of Homeland Security to be producing goods with forced labor. And that is the presumption that they're going to be working on because they cannot get any other information otherwise. So what it says here is that despite this broad prohibition of this is an import sanction, to be clear about this. This doesn't quite exactly apply to this. But what it will do is there's a presumption that you will be using forced labor, but
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
there's a rebuttal process which allows the companies to provide clear and convincing evidence to the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner that they do not. Now, I don't think that anyone here wants to do business with a company that uses forced labor. So you have a decision to make. They will be in August or late July be required to produce this evidence to the Border, or Customs and Border Protection Administrator. So then you will have an opportunity.
Thank you.
You will have an opportunity.
You've actually already provided
Yeah,
this
but
this exact dialogue.
Yes, but you will have this opportunity. Mr. Sandy, I am trying to, this is germane.
It actually is germane, and it was germane the last time you brought it forward.
Yes, but you haven't.
We've already evaluated this information, and now it's time to move on.
But
Thank you. Please
there is
take
one
your-
more
Sir,
thing here. There's one
please
more
take
thing
your
here.
seat.
I'll give you one more sentence.
Okay?
You have an opportunity coming up to get this information from Customs and Border Prevention or Protection to make an evaluation based on what the federal government says, whether or not Fufeng is using forced labor. Then you will have that information from a reputable source, from the federal government. It's the only source that you will have it from, get it from. And then you will have an ethical, moral decision to make
Mr.
whether to go
Lee, thank
forward
you.
or not.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I don't, whichever Spicer would like to speak first is fine. Mr. Spicer, sir.
Hi, Craig Spicer, Grand Forks, 3225 North Washington. Okay, for the record, I'm decidedly with Kevin on this, I'm sorry, Ken, on the fact that we need to back up a little bit and kind of get our ducks in a row. I propose that we need a task force for an environmental impact study. I don't want that to go on record. To study the impact of the site plan, the impact of the size of the plant, the hours they're working, the noise pollution, the air pollution, the water pollution, the steam pollution, the rodent problem, all the things that are come down that are going to affect the people that are closest to this project. Now, Mr. Sproul, he gave a big argument there, but I know where he's coming from. He's going to be on the dollar side of this thing, okay? The residents and the business owners are going to be on the other side of this argument because it's going to cost them to bring these guys to town, which we don't want. Okay? That's where I'm coming from. I'm a proud American. I don't want to see my country go down the tubes because we don't have the common sense to see through this thing that's going on to us right here and right now. Okay. The next thing is, how much land do they actually need for this proposal? Why are we going out and giving them 370 acres when they probably only need 40 acres? And another question, down the road, are we going to let them continue to buy farmland like they are doing all over our country? 800 and some thousand acres is what the Chinese own right now. Virginia, Nevada, Montana, a couple of the other ones, okay? The next thing is, who's going to safeguard us if we don't safeguard ourselves? That's why I'm here tonight. The mayor probably said that he contacted all of these places. Everybody we talk to doesn't seem to know a thing about it, and they're afraid to say anything about it because they don't want to get involved. Okay, I'm not too impressed with our country when it comes to watching over their people that are, you know, fighting for their rights. Now, the next thing, can they dump their own byproducts on that property, or will they be dumping their byproducts on city land or city facilities or whatever? And will they need a permit if they do? More questions, okay? Next question. How large is the annexation to me and the business people out there? How far is that going to extend? I haven't heard any dollar figures. They seem to know everything else. Give us some answers about how much it's going to cost us, other than 110 million or whatever. It's, you know, I understand their figures. I agree with that. But at the same time, they better have their, you know, they need to know what they're going to put down on us. And we need to know. And we haven't heard a thing about it. Now, the next thing is, does the Planning and Zoning Committee think that it's okay that they take agricultural farmland, which is good farmland? I'm right next to it. I'm on the line. You're going to be my neighbors if this goes through. And I'll tell you what, it's not going to be good for me. I hope you can see it coming from my point.
I understand you're businessmen, you're very wealthy. Okay, I've seen some documents on you. I'm not very impressed. Okay, that's nothing personal, that's the way it is. But at the same time, you're taking away my livelihood. And so will they,
Mr. Spicer,
if they vote for this.
If you would address us, please.
Okay, two other comments, please. Just give me 1 second, okay? Now, I don't really want to go down this road, but I'm going to go down it because it needs to be said. I want to know, and I believe it was Mr. Phelan that said it was his initial setup that brought this to us. And what I'm getting to here is the people that were in charge of bringing this thing, if it comes down to it that it goes through, I want everybody to know who brought this deal to us and why they have the right to do it. Also, I need to know from him right now who the property owners are and how much an acre it cost. People want to know those facts. Can you help me, Mr. Sandy?
I believe it's public record in the documents.
Well, I'm asking you.
They paid $26,000 per acre.
$26,000 an acre. Do you know what farmland went for in 2021? $2,300 an acre. Why would you not sell property for $26,000 an acre? How could, as a businessman, I would take that deal. If you're paying for all the infrastructure, you're paying for the improvements to the water plant, you're gonna get them all the water they want? You're gonna give them everything? Why wouldn't you take the deal?
Sir, they're going to be paying it in special assessments and utility bills.
Can I tell you something?
Yes, sir.
How old are you right now?
Oh, I'm
You'll be
almost 60
dead.
years old.
You'll be dead when this thing comes around to benefit any of us. I can tell you that.
I did a cursory, just for a side note, thank you, Mr. Spicer.
No, I have one other thing. I'm sorry, I have to do this. Do I have your permission to open this? Todd? Do I have your permission to open it? It's a byproduct. Okay, EDC. Okay, real quick. EDC promoted this other company, which is called the Red River Bioplant, right? Okay, now, this pertains to this subject, okay? They are failing miserably. They're the most high-tech bioplant that's come on the market, right? They're failing miserably. You are giving them a cushion of I don't know how many $100,000 because you're just looking the other way. Give me that same benefit, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Spicer.
The EDC?
Appreciate your time.
There. You guys want to smell what it smells like, a byproduct from that plant? I'm sorry, Brett, because you told me what happened when you smelled that plant. This is the smell of the Red River Bioplant. Okay, if I leave it open, you will throw up on me.
Thank you, Mr. Manichek.
All right, I'm done. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Kind of hard to follow all these guys, my gosh. Frank Matichek, 4150 Columbia Road North. I think I've been here a few times before. A couple of things. I don't usually rebut when somebody says something, but I have a lot of respect for Mr. Spruill. We actually farm across the road from each other. And I hope you can see through the fact that the state mill and this plant are not compatible. They're not the same thing. And Mr. Lund, I have a lot of respect for him. I don't know where he got his definition of value-added ag. But anytime you want to discuss it, I got 50 years of farming with value-added ag. And this project is not value-added ag. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Just say what it is. It's another market for selling your corn. There's nothing special here. It's just another market for selling your corn. We got 7 or 8 markets right now to sell our corn. So it's nothing special. Going back to one thing that Craig brought up, and I think I've asked this question too. How big is your assessment area going to be? Are you going to finger out 42nd, bring those people in to help pay for some of the expenses? How far is your assessment district going to go? Because if the further it goes, the more people aren't going to like it, right? Okay, no answers, nothing new.
I believe the actual assessment district is still in discussions.
Okay.
It hasn't been determined.
Well, a lot of things could be answered if you had a site plan, if you had an assessment district, if you had a bunch of other stuff.
We're trying to get this agreement signed
Right.
so that we can move forward and put that information together.
But hopefully you know some of these answers before you get the agreement going, so you can proceed with this if that's what you're going to do. I mean, You know, we've been asking questions for a long time. Another thing about the studies, who's going to do the studies and who's going to pay for them? The reason I ask that is if the customer has to do the studies, a lot of engineering firms, kind of like, if you're paying them, they kind of like to give you the answers you want. Is there going to be an independent study? I mean, is that something you guys are thinking about, or are you just going to rely on the builders or this group to give you those studies? And,
The city of Grand Forks will be initiating all of the studies.
okay. But they won't be paying for them.
The city of Grand Forks, I believe, will be fronting the money, and they will be covering half of the studies.
Okay.
the
So
studies.
who
And
picks
then
it?
a letter of credit if things don't move
Right.
forward, will cover that additional expense.
So do you do the studies on bids, or how do you do it? Studies on bids? Okay.
Yes.
All right. One other quick question. The city attorney said the very first time we were here about having to buy a piece of the pond back for $26,000 an acre, and I believe he said it was because the city was going to have 30 acres to the north. Is that correct?
I do not recall that.
Why do you have to buy the pond then if you're not going to own property?
The stormwater pond issue is that the stormwater pond will be located on the Fufang property that will service property that is beyond other parcels. Fufang doesn't own them.
And the city of Grand Forks essentially owns all the stormwater ponds throughout our community. They are special assessed and then deeded back to the city so that the city can maintain them.
Okay, but he mentioned that he had to buy property for $26,000 an acre on this pond. Right?
There is a purchase of the stormwater pond location. Fufang will be contributing the area where the stormwater pond is located, but because other parcels are being serviced by the stormwater pond, there is a provision that talks about paying a portion of the fair market value or the purchase price that they paid for that land based upon the percentage of the number of acres that are being serviced by the stormwater pond.
Okay, thank you. I got more questions, but we'll do it another night.
Feel free to email.
No, I will. I'll do that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Matichak. Either Mr. Kramer or Ms. Spicer, if you're interested in speaking, that's fine.
Sheila Spicer, Grand Forks. All I want to know is I've been doing a lot of studying, calling a lot of people in North Dakota.
Can you come closer to the microphone?
Oh, I've been doing a lot of, on the computer, Google, getting hold of lots of state people. I want to know, there was an article that said there are 5 states, and I just want your information on this, 5 states in the United States, and North Dakota is one of them, that says we do not allow any foreign companies to buy agricultural property. You say Fufang is buying those 370 acres on their own. They are a foreign company. Where does this law come into effect? Do they get special stuff going on because you guys have worked with this? There is 5 states that do not allow foreign countries buying agricultural land, and we are one of them. Just explain it to me.
Land is for industrial development.
But it's agricultural they are buying. And it says it's not allowed in North Dakota. I mean, I've read it 3 or 4 times in different articles. What makes you have a provision to have it? That's all I want to know.
They're an American subsidiary.
Huh?
They're an American subsidiary.
They're from China.
I don't make the law.
Well, I'm getting hold of an awful lot of people in North Dakota. And I want to say, when you were running, and I know what you were doing, you were running for small businesses. That's what you ran for mayor on. You were going to knock out a lot of these, Baczynski, and you know it. Down the road, because, and this is what you ran on, small businesses, not these guys coming in. And I want to watch when these companies start, these people that have been on this place forever, start losing their businesses because of your infrastructure. You're going to charge them. And none of them, these are old businesses, have been here 50, 60 years. And the smell my husband brought up, that's a smell tons of people smell. You wouldn't even smell it. I bet you should go down like University and stuff. Sometimes that stinks so bad you're almost throwing up. And that was one of your economic developments that was done a few years ago. That's what you called this, economic development, the smell. I just want you guys kind of teeter-totter around to whatever, money. And it's kind of, that was your economic development. I read articles on it, you brought it in, you were so happy to bring these guys in. That's what stinks. That's what's coming out of their company out there. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Spicer.
Hopefully it's maybe the best for last.
Name and address for the record, please.
Phil Kramer, 2696 Fox Farm Road. I am the chairman of the Falconer Township Supervisors. As you've heard, not everybody that's been up here speaking is from Falconer Township. Some of the radio programs and the newspapers have kind of painted us all in the same picture. Not quite so. The township that I represent is just north of Grand Forks. And we're a half a township. A normal township is 36 sections. Because of the Red River, which we're up against, we're only 18 sections. Part of those sections have already been sucked up by the city of Grand Forks. 2 miles from the city limit is controlled by the city of Grand Forks extraterritorial zoning. In other words, the city, has permitting jurisdiction. So when something is built, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, building permits all have to be gotten through the city hall. Falconer Township has our own zoning, but we can't use that because the city supersedes that. When the permits are taken out and there's variances that are needed, we're supposed to be informed of that. We normally aren't. It's a bone of contention. We've had projects that have been crammed down our throats, like the diversion ditch project. We never got a whiff at that, never was consulted. The city landfill, which is right next door to us, we were told we were going to be good neighbors to the city, right? Our roads have been abused with loaded trucks, where the city had said, no, we're not going to do that. The city was going to bail all the garbage that was going to there. They're not bailing. It's quite a mess out there, which is blowing into some of my Falconer Township residents' property. Not in my backyard. We're not against economic development, really. Mindac Growers, CF Industries, Grand Forks Trust, Northern Plains Railroad, TP&L, Sewell Farms, Simplot Soil Builders, all in Falconer Township. You realize that we rezoned property at the north end so that NPN could have a rail spur for their future plant. They purchased land. If and when that ever goes, they have the right to use that. We're not against economic development. We'd have liked to have been consulted. We never were. My residents are against this. And you've had the reasons why. Some of them you've blown holes in already. Some of them are very valid reasons that we really don't want this in our backyard or our front yard. But going forward, I would like the city council and the city people to consult with us, to give us an opportunity to give our 2 cents worth in. I've been a township supervisor for over 20 years. We've seen city councils come and go. We've seen mayors come and go. We've seen city department heads come and go. And if it ain't written down, that collective memory seems to be really short. I can remember not so long ago when the extraterritorial zoning was 4 miles out. And the city legislature took that away back in 2007, back to 2 miles for the city the size of Grand Forks. We would like to have seen it gone even closer. So yes, we're against it. I don't want to burn any bridges though either. If this gets crammed down our throats, we'd still like to be at the table to work with the people that are coming in and to mitigate any bad things that might be happening in my backyard or my front yard.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you everyone for taking your time. We have a motion to approve the development agreement and a second on the floor. Is there further discussion? Ms. Mock?
One thing, I guess in the spirit of just offering a couple points, was the plume analysis part of the task orders? Is that included in the task orders that we're going to
Council President
consult
Sandy and Council Vice President Mock. It is, if
Okay.
you, it's the largest agreement, the over $1 million agreement. If you see, it's air permitting and plume analysis is
Okay, so
contained
that
within that
includes the
task order.
plume analysis.
That will be led by A2S and Black and Beach.
Okay. And I saw odor mentioned as a potential reason for it not moving forward. Do the results of the air analysis need to include something related to, a significant result with that or with the plume study?
That's another study that's contained within that project coordination support with A2S and Black and Beach. We intend to have Black and Beach come up with a study formulation for that particular task order.
Okay. One thing I didn't see mentioned was fire service. Are we looking at this, knowing that there's south end development and then this pushes north end development? Have we looked as a city, or can we look as a city to see what strain that puts on the fire and need for any further fire stations or personnel?
Council President Sandy and Council Vice President Mock, that's also contained, that public safety plan is also contained within that same task order. Our preliminary discussions with Chief Lorenz, with the Columbia Road Fire Station and others, we do not intend to build another fire station with additional firefighters. Similar to what we do with J.R. Simplot, the mill and elevator, North Dakota mill and elevator. There may be some specialized equipment that we may need, training, and as part of that public safety plan, we may require certain mitigating operations for Fufang and their wet corn mill.
Great. Thank you. Any further discussion? Related to the development agreement, there's a motion to approve and a second on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries. Dockler dissents. Is there a motion related to the task orders? Mr. Veen moves approval. Is there a second? Second by Weigel. Should we add all of the additional agreements on top of the task orders, Mr. Veen, or do you want to take them separately? They're all inclusive?
Yep, I would ask you to approve those agreements, those with the dollar amounts, and then also have them subject to review and approval, this time with the Finance Department, and any associated budget amendments that are required for those studies and those agreements.
Great. Moved by Veen. Is there a second by Weigel? Yes. Okay. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. No other items under informational item. There is a 3.1 COVID update for your information. Is there a motion to adjourn by Weber, second by Weigel? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.